Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Turnip's Digest, starting right on time as usual, though at a different time now. It's been a while since I have streamed here on this platform, but I have been active elsewhere. You can check my links in the description if that so interests you. With all that out of the way, I am joined this morning by John from Knights of Dissent.
Hello,
He is a
hello.
Yes, welcome. He is a writer from the Old Glory Club and a political commentator on YouTube. How are you doing, John?
I was doing pretty good until you sent me this video, and now I'm doing okay.
Yeah, that's a pretty justified reaction, I'd have to say. But before we get into that, could you introduce yourself a little bit for the audience? I gave you a brief list of affiliations, but what do you do? What are your interests? Why might I have brought you on? If you don't mind.
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel that's supposed to be weekly uploads, but it's more like bi-monthly uploads. It's like a variety show. Like Ryan said, I write for the OGC occasionally. I still need to do that for this month. I was in the LCMS a very long time ago. I was baptized LCMS, I believe, at age 8. I have long since left. I have not stepped foot in an LCMS church in a very long time. I like economics, history, political theory, pretty much anything related to the stuff in this sphere. Why Ryan brought me on, I have no idea.
Yeah, fantastic. I figured, given the content of what we're going to be reviewing this morning, you would be a natural fit for picking it apart, which is what we intend to do. This is going to be heavily criticizing a video that was put out by the flagship seminary of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. This would be Concordia St. Louis. And I'm not picking this because of some sort of feud or anything like that. Rather, this is a very interesting discussion that has been opened up by them that delves into historical political movements, the tying of faith to politics, and a few other a few other things that might interest the viewership of this channel. And what's more is that it's most certainly not sympathetic to anything that any of us would be doing. So it's from an outside opinion. We'll just be checking in on what everyone else is doing while the dissident sphere has been developing at a breakneck speed. That's the general idea. So, do you have any other thing to open with, John?
Not really. I feel like this is going to be like one of those Last Jedi, like every frame of pause react videos. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a gem.
Yeah. We've handicapped ourselves though by not giving any sort of face cam, so it's going to be purely verbal reaction. We're going to have to communicate that sense of urgency and what on earth did I just see? Yeah.
Real. Well,
So
yeah. Let's see this video.
yeah. So for everyone that is wanting to know what we're talking about, might have saw the title of the YouTube stream. This gentleman is going to be presenting on an idea that there is a rise of a scary political ideology amongst Christians, including Lutherans and other Protestants, and that is integralism. We'll get into why that's somewhat strange, why that might be a little bit sloppy historically. We'll get into all of that, but that's the topic of this video. There's a scary specter haunting Christianity in America, and that specter's name is integralism. So we'll start off. John, if you have anything that you want to add, just say something and I'll pause the video.
All right, sounds good.
And we will switch over to this. So that's your title card for anyone watching.
Hi, my name is Graham Glover. I'm the pastor of Abiding Savior Lutheran Church and School in Gainesville, Florida, and also a Army Reserve chaplain assigned to the Office of the Chief of Chaplains at the Pentagon. Here to give my paper via video that I gave at Concordia Seminary's annual symposium this year in September. Always difficult to talk to a camera when you don't have an audience in front of you, but The title of my paper, as I'm sure is noted on the website, is The Rise of Integralism and Why Lutherans Should Resist It.
So already we know this is going to be good because it's being pronounced integralism. That's a petty thing for me to point out, but it's maybe it's a sign of things to come for everyone watching.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Two thoughts before I begin. One, it is not the rise of Instagram and why Lutherans should resist it, although this is what a lot of my friends and colleagues thought it was before I gave the paper.
More signs of things to come. This is the flagship academic seminary. Potentially, this guy's giving his paper to audiences, potentially confusing integralism for Instagram. Nice joke, but it raises some questions. A little bit of foreshadowing, typical stuff.
It's a strange word. I don't like saying it, but we'll get through it. And secondly, and I think most importantly for me, the topics and the things that I'll talk about in this paper mean a great deal to me. They're things that have been part of my professional and academic career for the last 30 years. And it's something that I'm very concerned about and hope that this will spur further conversation and dialogue on what I think is a pretty important issue. So first, an introduction. As chaotic as our culture may seem, and it certainly is chaotic, where the place and the voice of the church is increasingly questioned, this is what the intent of this symposium was all about, I think we need to first be honest about who we are as a country. That is, who we are as Americans. We are a pluralistic bunch of folks.
Already, we have a very interesting assertion, which is that...
Yeah, we are? Since when?
So, like, this is very interesting because it's like a civics class, like 101 introduction to American politics that you would take in a college undergrad degree or maybe at the end of high school. They just throw around words like pluralism. As if you're supposed to, you hear plurality, that means many different things, very good, very positive associations with that word just by the root words in it alone. But it's already a very dubious assertion, and he's going to qualify it more. So, well,
there's a chronic lack of defining words in this video. Pluralism means a lot of different things. It could be pluralism of institutions, pluralism of religions. It sounds like he's talking about like pluralism of ideological thought,
or even religions, which would be extremely questionable for a cleric to praise pluralism of religions, but we'll get there in a moment. He's going to qualify it a little bit. We don't expect many definitions throughout this little presentation, but this is already strange because if we take any of those ideas that John and I just threw out as to what pluralism could mean, there's only really maybe one that's applicable to anything American throughout its history until very recently. And it's going to be the having a plurality of different like political factions or interest groups. And even then, that's you see times in American history where they coalesce around the same thing, and you suddenly have two monolithic entities trying to battle each other that usually tears the country apart. We were very homogenous religiously, depending on the region. This is a nation that is larger than anything that the Europeans have ever come across. The South was extremely Anglican until the Second Great Awakening, at which point it became very Baptist. The Mid-Atlantic states tended to be very Methodist. And then before that, it was a mishmash of different post-Anglican branches. The Northeast tended to be Congregationalist. I don't know that you can say that that's pluralistic because none of those people were living in societies where other religions were. It was just regionally pluralistic, as if that matters.
Yeah, it was illegal prior to the ratification of the Constitution. I mean, there were plenty of states where there was an official established state church, and deviation from that was illegal. Even after the adoption of the Constitution, there was still official establishmentarianism well into the mid-1800s.
Most famously, Massachusetts, if I remember correctly, was the last the last state to disestablish its state church, after a series of court cases where people were disputing their tax money going to the Massachusetts state church, which was puritanical or congregationalist in nature. So, like, that's the religious angle. I don't think anyone is going to claim outside of the demographic stuff in the South that America was a pluralistic society ethnically.
Goodness, no.
You hear the founding fathers all the time talking about how it's a nation for Western and Northern Europeans, depending on which founding father it is. Benjamin Franklin, as has been memed to death, had a very strict view as to what this constituted. Others had a more liberal or expansive view. The Southerners, even then, did not consider any of their slaves to be Americans. This was the subject of the multiple court cases leading up to the Civil War, was that they weren't Americans, according to these people. And then even then, after emancipation, they were still considered American citizens, but to claim that that the society was pluralistic in the South would be breaking even very mainstream narratives about segregation and Jim Crow. So already we're off to a very dubious start as to America being pluralistic, but maybe we're talking about America in the modern sense of the word. We can give him that benefit of the doubt. I say we watch on and see if he qualifies this.
Chris Walsh and William McKenzie, who work for the George W. Bush Presidential Center, noted earlier this year that America is a nation of over 300 million quirky people with vastly different outlooks and experiences. Even so, we share a common story based on democratic values that bind us as a nation.
Do we?
The George W. Bush Foundation, really?
So, okay, yeah, that's low-hanging fruit. But I do. Is that claim true? Do the different American groups share a common foundation in democratic values? And we can reason through this using the very mainstream claims. If one accepts that universal suffrage is ideal, then no, America most certainly does not have a shared heritage in democratic values. In fact, there are certain religious groups in the country today that won't permit women in their households to vote. That's not a shared heritage in democratic values. Before the 1920s, what's the famous mainstream assertion? Half the population was unable to vote because women weren't allowed to vote. That's not a shared heritage in democratic values. But one might even ask, what on earth is a democratic value? Sounds warm and fuzzy to a very mainstream historical believer. But it's pretty clear, based on the various political machines in the late 1800s, that even the different immigrant groups that were coming over here supposedly to experience the democracy and freedom of the U.S., as is so often touted in mainstream history, they most certainly did not have the democratic values that it takes to be an American, because they just founded one-party political machines in these port cities that they ended up in. Like, this is a strange assertion from a neoconservative establishment that's being used here to prove an American history that doesn't exist. Is what I would say. Do you have anything to add, John?
I have no comment. It's coming at this from a very, I would hesitate to say Buckleyite worldview. We're not that far into it yet, so I wouldn't want to go that far. But there's a lot of hidden assumptions here. I think that'll become more apparent as we go on.
Yeah, that's fair. Let's keep going.
We strive toward lofty ideals like all people being created equal, with certain unalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Pluralism is the mechanism within this narrative that helps us to peacefully coexist by reconciling our myriad differences with shared values. Specifically, they say pluralism is social tolerance for individuals or groups who have different backgrounds, different views, and different beliefs. It also
Okay, so we've got a definition, and everyone in the audience can follow along to see if we stick with this definition throughout. But so pluralism now just means tolerance.
Different values, different groups, and different beliefs.
Yeah, which may naturally raise the question: why not just say that tolerance is the thing that makes that makes this American society stay together, according to their view? But pluralism is an older word and has been used in American civic society for a long time, so I guess they need that legitimacy, if you will. But that's a definition. Cling to it. It's going to be very valuable, very rare, if you will. So America is founded on tolerance. We'll keep going before we dig into this any farther.
Provides them space to express views and practice their beliefs without reprisal, even when in conflict with others. To that end, I think it's safe to say not only do we Americans support pluralism, we like liberal ideals. We're liberal, not in the Democratic Party sense of being liberal, but we're liberal in the sense of Enlightenment liberalism, the very foundation of this country.
So that's we can see now kind of where he's going with this, and I don't want to keep stopping this and throwing out all the critiques before we get to anything important. But this is going to be an assertion that he throws out, that we're founded on Enlightenment liberalism, and that's what makes America a distinct entity or country. We'll wait to get to the tolerance and pluralism stuff in a second, but this assertion, I don't want it to stand throughout this, because it fundamentally misunderstands the development of America or the American people. And you can find this in any thinker that goes through American history, especially before the 1940s. Like even H.L. Mencken in his book on the American language will acknowledge that an American people starts existing basically the first generation after people are born on the shores from Europe. So that's one generation down from colonists, the very first colonists, and you already see distinct American identities emerging depending on where on the seaboard you are. So this view, though, that you can have a nation founded on an intellectual movement is very it's extremely modern. People, if you just interact with people in day-to-day life, they aren't intellectual. The vast majority of people do not focus on intellectual pursuits because it's not beneficial to them. This is part of dividing labor in a society, is that not everyone has to be an intellectual. People can go throughout their life not having to think about these things, and that's how it should be. Not everyone should be an intellectual. But that also means you can't found a people or a nation or a country on intellectual ideals. You can have that mixed in, but that can't be the foundation. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Surely you would have something to add there, John.
Well, it just sounds very French. This whole introduction sounds almost like the sort of state secularism of France. And in France, it might actually be true to a certain degree, where it was essentially a propositional country. It was an entirely reconstructed society based on philosophical principles. Now, obviously, today, I don't think most French people actually believe in it, but the government there still pays lip service to these ideals. I just don't see this in American history.
Right. But even in France, even during the height of their revolution, they still could distinguish between a French person or a French citizen, and a German, somehow.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a rewriting of American history that mainstreamers very often get away with when they shouldn't. They reduce American political and national development down to these intellectual movements, which isn't how nations actually come about. If you can have a distinct language, a generation after the first people that you draw your heritage back to arrived on the shores, that's not an Enlightenment concept, and it's most certainly not an intellectual concept. It's a natural development of a people, and that just kind of gets brushed under the rug here.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to add before we keep going?
No, let's keep going.
Okay.
Most Americans, I recognize, know very little about people like John Locke or John Stuart Mill. Maybe they know just a little bit more about a guy named Adam Smith.
So that's his liberal values that we're drawing upon for American political development. This is the great liberal thinkers that he believes that this intellectual movement that created America drew upon was Adam Smith, John Locke, and John Stuart Mill. Um, yeah,
Okay.
John, you comment real quick. I'm sure you have something to say on that.
I mean, okay, big if true. I'd like citation needed. I don't see there is a Lockean influence for sure. I wouldn't say if it's as much of a Smithian influence on the American founding, and I certainly wouldn't say those are the core. That was like the core of the revolutionary movement. It was Congregationalists, really, in New England, who were the core of the revolution and the creation of an American identity. The South was rather reticent to become a separate nation, but yeah, I don't really see it.
Yeah, and this is strange to me. So like Adam Smith published the thing that everyone now remembers him for, the year that we declared independence. And that's not even the work that the people at his time, his contemporaries, remembered him for. This Wealth of Nations book. It was the theory of moral sentiments. And despite that, the American state did not really incorporate either recommendations from Smith in its foundational policies. What you see is you have different factions stemming from different peoples, if you will, under this new banner. North, South, and Mid-Atlantic, just sort of in the middle. The North had a political economy that leaned extremely protectionist, leaned extremely towards state development of industries and just industries and trade, which is not at all Smithian. The South, by contrast, was very much in favor of free trade, not because of any profound ideals or whatever, but because that was what their political economy and their way of life, their political structures and social structures was based around. If the South could not trade, it was fundamentally changed. The entire society would be upended. And then the Central Atlantic states, the Mid-Atlantic states, once again, heavily based around commerce. This is New York City, Philadelphia, these places that don't fit in either the Northeast or the South. They were based around commerce, sure, but they were doing this far before Smith ever put anything to paper. So that's like the most compelling thing that he said, and I don't know that it bears out. He throws Locke around. Locke quite famously wrote the Constitution for the Carolina colony, and it looks nothing like anything that most moderns think of when they think of Locke.
The U.S. Constitution was based off of the English Bill of Rights and the surrounding documents.
Right, and so this idea that they throw out Lockean slogans that were modified. So we don't even get pure Locke in any of the non-founding documents, just things that were around the founding documents. But even then, it's a certain kind of Locke. It's not Locke in his entirety, where he was instituting a rigidly feudal state in the Carolina colonies. Yeah. It's Locke writing about various different developments of government culminating in some sort of English liberalism, of which doesn't look very liberal to moderns today. These supposedly more liberal, less feudalistic documents that Locke wrote are where you find his prescriptions for executing atheists, because he claims that that's necessary for a liberal society. I mean, maybe this gentleman would consider that to be a liberal foundation of the American state, but it would be very tenuous. And then John Stuart Mill is a very interesting name to throw out there, because that's moving forward. That we couldn't have been founded on him because he came later. So maybe he influenced us. But if so, how?
I mean, Britain was a trade adversary. I mean, there were merchant wars with the Royal Navy and British commerce. John Stuart Mill was essentially apologetics for the British system. It certainly wasn't something that would have influenced. It came too late in history to influence the American founding. I don't really see. I mean, if you read, John Stuart Mill is fundamentally an imperialist, and he's also fundamentally a social democrat who wants this like secularized education system that makes all ideas like quasi equal, and that's just not something you see really until the progressive era. Millsian social democracy is not something you'd see really within the first 75 years of U.S. history.
Right, and if anyone thinks of Mills, they'll think of utilitarianism. That's not something that comes to mind when you think of anything American, is utilitarianism. Maybe not until the post-war consensus after World War II. When you think of Northern abolitionists, you don't think of utilitarianism. When you think of Southern secessionists, it's certainly not utilitarian. When you think of the idea of a American state even existing apart from the British Empire, it's not utilitarian. I have a feeling that this was just he's claiming that Americans are liberal or liberal inspired. Their national identity is based on liberalism, and so he had to throw out socially acceptable and mainstream liberal thinkers. I think
just ones that people would even know.
Yeah,
I think that's part of it too. Is that these are just the names that people read in high school.
Exactly. So I think we've made our point here. We'll continue this. This will get into religious topics soon, and that's where this is really going to heat up.
They know dismayingly little, if polls are any guide, about the finer points of the founding or the finer print of the U.S. Constitution. But that doesn't change the fact that Americans are exceedingly liberal in their attitudes and expectations. According to a 2021 Gallup survey, 84% of Americans have a positive view of free enterprise. Polls routinely find that Americans place a very high value on liberal linchpins of the existing regime, from free speech to fair trials to property rights, and something that I'm very familiar with, religious freedom. Yes, we Americans like our freedom. We Americans like our individual rights. We Americans are pluralistic.
So we've already we've moved away a little bit from pluralism meaning tolerance, which if you look at the development of American political thought, you can most certainly have these so-called rights of free speech, property rights, and whatever without having tolerance. I don't think anyone will claim that America suddenly developed rights in the 1970s. That would certainly destroy this guy's historical line of thinking. So we've already seen pluralism move away from tolerance to now it's just having rights for everybody, which is fundamentally different, and that will become apparent as we keep watching. John, did you have anything to say?
No, let's keep going.
Okay.
Incidentally, we in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod like them too. Let's not forget why this church body exists. Our Saxon immigrants came to this country to practice the religion that they believed to be true, confessional Orthodox Lutheranism. We came because pluralism, liberalism did not exist in the land in which our forefathers came from.
Now this is quite a strange historical admission here, because the reason why you have this, for people that don't know what he's talking about, this sort of inside baseball. But the people that originally founded this this confessional Orthodox church in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod in St. Louis, New Bremen, as it was at the time, came over here because in Prussia, the Prussian Union of Churches was established by the monarch, which forced Lutherans and Calvinists to unite under one church body. Some people will say it's so he could commune with his wife, because the ruling house of Prussia was Calvinistic, whereas his wife was Lutheran. Other people will say that this was for political expediency. Others will say that it had theological foundations, whatever. That's the background here. But something he's not saying is that this union of churches and this rise of sort of the idea that a monarch could conglomerate different Christian traditions could only exist because of enlightened despotism, which is an Enlightenment idea. So that's something he's not going to say, and that's because it kind of destroys his whole historical line of reasoning here. These people that came over to the United States to found this church body that I and many others are a part of were fleeing a form of Enlightenment ideals. Of course, he's not going to say that, because they weren't the right kind of Enlightenment ideals. They needed tolerance and pluralism, which if one were to pursue that line of thinking, it becomes much stranger because tolerance and pluralism, one can make the argument, was the foundation for the Prussian Union of Churches. It was a religious settlement to make sure that people stopped dividing themselves and started tolerating other confessional traditions to an extreme point. So we haven't exactly set a line on where tolerance ends and other higher ideals take precedent. And we've kind of just started rewriting or omitting parts of history that might be that might be inconvenient for this narrative that's being painted here. That's the thing that stuck out to me the first time I listened to this. It's extremely ironic. John, did you have anything to say to that? Maybe on perhaps the immigration narrative.
I mean, I don't know. I don't really know anything about the LCMS's founding. I do know about the creation of the Union in Prussia. I mean, yeah, that's a liberal creation. It's a complete liberal creation. It really is. Yeah, the enlightened despot forcing political unity among squabbling factions, and I can't say it was entirely misguided. Right. I mean, I'm sure there were very, good-hearted motivations behind it, but it was a liberal creation. If your objection to, if your objection is to that, then you have to analyze where that came from.
Right, exactly. So that's the point that I wanted to draw here. And then there's a second point, and one could make the argument that the only reason that these German Lutherans, if I remember correctly, I think they were mostly Silesian, but that's not necessarily to the point. I just think that that's where they came from. The only reason that they could come over here and settle along the Mississippi was because an American state had already existed that was profoundly Protestant. And was basically going out through the West and claiming it for some sort of a Protestant people. Beforehand, if this state didn't exist, this profoundly non-tolerant state towards Catholics and various Mediterranean peoples, then what would have been in St. Louis and across the West? Well, it would have been either French or Spanish, which most certainly is not tolerant, according to this guy, or according to anyone else who understands what's happening in France or Spain during this era, which would be the early 1800s. So this is historical irony on top of historical irony, I would say. Do you have anything else that you wanted to say, John?
No, not now.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll keep going.
However, there is a rising anti-liberalism that is sweeping across the world. Liberal societies claim to advance human freedom and equality and to resist building social life around a single religion. But today, an opposing clan of these doctrines is on the rise. Call them religious anti-liberalism. They claim that society should recognize a single religion as correct, and they reject the liberal order with intensity.
Okay, so we have our little we're painting the emotions here. We've said how great and wonderful liberalism is and Enlightenment ideals, but now there's this scary group of he's basically calling them religious extremists. He's saying that in so many words. They're on the rise and they're trying to oppose this. They want one religion to be recognized by the state, which is if you know anything about especially European history or Christian history across the old world, was the norm. That is the historical normal. And then once again, as we mentioned earlier, in the United States at the very least, state governments had recognized religions and state churches. So these group of terrifying religious extremists that are anti-liberal are apparently advocating returning to something that existed in this supposedly liberal country up until the 1830s or 40s. It's a very strange narrative that's being painted here.
Yeah, it's very French. That's all I can say.
Alrighty, yeah. We'll keep going just to get through a little bit more.
The 21st century has witnessed the revival of faith-infused political movements. Just think of Russia, India, Poland, Hungary, Turkey, China. They're
So,
really? I mean, they weren't gone for that long in Poland, and that was just because they were a Soviet puppet state.
Yeah, and then what happened to Turkey? Why is Turkey seeing a revival of religious movements? Well, one can make the argument that this is what he's referring to here is like the government of Turkey, because it was famously secularized after World War One. But that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that Turkish society was secularized. It's not. If you look at a map of atheism, agnosticism, or secularism, you're not going to find Turkey anywhere near the top.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's just like go through the examples he's giving here. So Russia. So he's saying Russia is returning to religiously infused politics. Um, why wasn't why wasn't it infused with politics previously? And the answer is because it was the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Right?
There was a
under
Bolshevik
secular communist dictatorship that prevented it from happening. That there was a immense effort to subvert Russian Orthodoxy. There was an immense effort to secularize their society, and within 20 years of that system collapsing, we're trying to return to the status quo. I mean, there's no claimant to the throne, right? There's a sort of strongman dictator there in the form of Putin, but yeah, it's not like there was liberalism in Russia and now it's becoming illiberal. Unless you want to argue that like that the somehow like Boris Yeltsin's government was going to go down a path of enlightenment liberalism. I don't really see that. Same with India. So why is India becoming more religious? Well, I mean, because there's a massive upswing in sort of almost like lower caste Hindu identity. Again, I mean, the religious infused politics has only been suppressed in India because of foreign influence. It was there before. There was, the British kind of kept it somewhat under control, and then there was so much pressure from the outside world to keep India peaceful that the religious conflicts were kind of kept under control. Not very well, if you know the history of India in the 20th century. But yeah, now it's coming back. And then Poland, I mean, Poland has their own branch of the Catholic Church. Like Poland has historically had their religion so infused with politics that they have their own like quasi schismatic branch of the Catholic Church that's like this puppet of the Polish government. And that was only suppressed because of it was a Soviet puppet for the better part of the 20th century. I mean, it's a very bizarre historical like none of these states were liberal.
Yeah,
now they're becoming illiberal.
That's the point that I was going
to. They were socialist or like post-colonial states that are just returning to their previous form.
Yeah, that's the point that I was going to bring up here, is that all of these states that he listed out are not like scary Christians reacting to liberalism and trying to go to some one religion state that's anti-liberal. Russia never had liberalism. Even Boris Yeltsin was recognized to be some form of like a conservative of the people there. He had people to his left, most certainly, that called themselves liberals, disregarding their very memey liberal Democratic Party, which is a misnomer. But you see that secular Russian history is a hiccup.
Yeah.
Every single time beforehand and apparently afterwards now. I don't know if I entirely buy into this guy's claim that Russia is re-Christianizing, if you will, but we'll grant that. It's returning to how things were 4 to 5 generations ago.
Yeah, it's the closest that Russia got to liberalism was probably Tsar Nicholas.
Yeah. Well, quite explicitly.
If he had not been overthrown, it's possible that Russia could have kind of gone the way of sort of a Prussian statism, and then kind of becoming a sort of quasi parliamentary system within 100 years. Maybe that could have happened, but just historically, it was never a liberal society.
Right. Well, and for those in the audience that don't know, it was reforms under Tsar Nicholas that established a parliamentary system that wasn't entirely a figurehead. That's not to say it had wide-reaching powers, but things did happen there. They did govern. So this strange idea that anti-liberalism and exalting one specific religion over the others is incompatible with how things were, incompatible with Enlightenment ideas. It doesn't bear out. What you see is that these Christians that supported an established church and a anti-liberal political order tended to actually liberalize things, at least economically and in some social regards. In the United Kingdom, which is not a thing that he mentioned, the Liberal Party was seen to be embarrassingly too Christian. This is something that you see with Gladstone versus Disraeli. Disraeli being the Jewish conservative prime minister, Gladstone being the hardcore Scotsman Christian foreign policy man. Gladstone criticized the conservative government in the United Kingdom in the 1880s because it was not being too Christian on the global scale, because it had not Christianized Egypt, even though it had control over it. Like, this is your liberalism. The guy's arguing for not just a national state church, but a state church that is going to go and imperialize foreign dominions that they had just acquired. And he's criticizing the conservatives because they weren't being Christian enough. They weren't being one party or one church stated enough. It's
I don't quite see what he's trying to defend here. I mean, there was the 20th century, which was this massive conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, and then in the 1990s, it briefly becomes the United States as the sole superpower, and you do see this sort of nominal shift towards liberal states, but as soon as that U.S. power waned, they just reverted back. I'm not sure what he's trying to defend here, unless he's trying to say that the Soviet Union was like liberal, which I doubt.
Yeah, I somewhat doubt that as well. I think what's happened here is he's just picked up countries that may have been in the news that sound scary. He's trying to say there are Christian extremists on the rise without saying it, and here's where they're doing it. Or religious extremists that are on the rise, and here's where they're doing it. So India, Russia, China. Didn't he mention China? That's an interesting
I don't
one.
know. I don't think that. I don't know if he did. If so, that wouldn't make any sense. But
yeah. So we'll keep going. I think we've made the point here that this is a very strange historical view, and as we get through this, you're going to see what this historicism is being used to justify. So we'll keep going.
Anti-liberalism sometimes arrives from liberal imperialism and colonialism, as we see in Islam or in Hinduism. Christian liberalisms often appear after communism, or they often develop as a reaction to excessive church-state separations in liberal orders. And let me be clear, this anti-liberalism is dangerous. And our people, yes, our Lutheran Church Missouri Synod people, maybe even you, are ripe to embrace it. David French wrote in the New York Times opinion.
Okay, before we get to the David French quotes and this section, because this is where the tone starts to change. Anti-liberalism is dangerous, and it could be anywhere. It could be with you. It could be with me. It could even be with your own pastor. You know, this sort of fear mongering. There's many different ways you could discuss this. I'm going to take a different path potentially, and I'm just going to ask a question. Is anti-liberalism more dangerous than liberalism? Very, very simple question, and we can look at it.
It's worth thinking about. I mean, was the hypothetically was the Ottoman Empire a better place to live than, I don't know. I mean, was there more freedom in the Ottoman Empire than there is like in modern France? I mean, honestly, there
but
was a
he's
great
not
deal
saying...
of freedom in these illiberal pre-modern societies. I
No,
mean,
but he's not even arguing about freedom. He's saying it's dangerous. Anti-liberalism is dangerous. So, to who is a great question, but let's just analyze this claim a little bit. So, we can grant him, despite everything that we've said so far in this stream, that sure, America is a liberal society. We're not going to look at it. We can say that most Western European states were liberal. We're not going to look at them and their history. Let's look at, say, Central Europe. before liberalism as an ideology or an idea came about in the Enlightenment, you had extreme political decentralization to the point where if there was a war, not everyone in a polity was called on to support the war effort. Wars were very much localized. You didn't have total mobilization of the industries and commerce whenever a war broke off. The people who prosecuted the wars had to fund them themselves, which acts as an inhibitor on the scope of a war. Overall, less people died, barring a few major examples where wars did tend more total, like the 30 Years' War. Less people as a proportion of their population died in wars than after liberalism, where you have the world wars caused by liberal ideals, if you will, at least on the part of the West. And
if you believe the official narrative, if you believe Woodrow Wilson, then yeah, it was a war of liberal domination over the despotic East,
right?
By which he meant Germans,
yes,
and Russians. Yeah, it was the war of enlightened freedom over the despotism of the Orient. By which he meant Prussia.
So combat casualties as a proportion of population disprove this claim already.
Anti-liberalism died in the 30 Years' War total, and most of that was from disease. I mean, that's 30 years compared to World War II.
So, right, which, so if we just look at and you can even go back to the enlightened despotism, where you saw Central Europe and Eastern Europe embraced sort of this liberal despotism. As soon as they do, you start seeing mass conscription into armies, which will devastate local towns, where these conscripts were taken from. They would just die somewhere in Central Europe to other conscript armies, because this enlightened state has a bunch of different financial mechanisms that were not available to pre-enlightened states, so they could fund larger wars. More people would die. That seems to be a pretty easy proof that liberalism does cause more damage. You see the entire globe being destabilized under liberal crusades far more than you did under these reactionary colonialist empire building schemes.
Yeah, no. If you read like the history of Egypt, for example. The history of Egypt under the Ottoman Empire is every 150 years or so, some guy named like Mehmet Pasha decides that he's going to break away from the Ottoman Empire and turn it into his little fiefdom, turn all of Egypt into his little fiefdom. And then the Ottoman Empire sends, 1,000 soldiers, and there's a small battle and he loses. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you saw under pre-liberal conflict, was just fundamentally very different.
And this is,
even if you compare the worst excesses of the wars of religion, it's nothing compared to the actions of liberal governments today. I mean, even if you look at like North Africa, what's going on in North Africa for the past 30 years, both from France and the United States, these benevolent liberal states intervening, it really does put things into perspective.
Right, and this is just warfare and geopolitics. We can look domestically. Would you rather walk through every street in London in 1913 or today? Which do you think is going to result in more harm to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather walk through. Pretty much anywhere. I mean, maybe. Yeah, no, good point. I can't even come with a counter example to that. I mean,
like you can even point out 1913 certainly would have had like poor street gangs in London that would have made things more violent, but it pales in comparison to anything that you would see today.
Yeah, and you were like, if you were caught, you were hanged, because murder and robbery were serious crimes that were actually prosecuted by the state.
Yeah. Back when felonies
there was actually legal recourse. The only thing that held back law enforcement was a lack of, forensic technologies that exist today. The government did prosecute crimes.
So, and you can apply this to basically any metropolis in the Western world today. And why is it that they are now? Why is it that most people would say, well, obviously the modern day is more unsafe than over 100 years ago? Well, you can look at what liberalism's domestic policies are in regards to demographics and immigration.
You just
This
look at like Sweden, right? I mean, what is it? The rate of sexual violence in Sweden? I mean, you're looking at like 400% increases.
right, of which a majority of that is from people born outside of Sweden.
Yeah, but who let them in?
Right, right, exactly.
Like, why are they there? It's not like
So,
the Ottoman Empire invaded yesterday. Now Sweden is under the control of the Sultan.
Exactly. So we can have 40 other different thought experiments where we go under this. I don't think that this claim is true. I think it's absolute hogwash. This idea that anti-liberalism is somehow more dangerous than liberalism, unless we're defining danger to mean we are going against the Enlightenment, in which case this is just a tautology. Like, if this guy thinks that danger is whenever you do an anti-Enlightenmentism, then sure, yeah, it becomes dangerous, but then I don't think that danger is wrong in that sense.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going.
Yeah, yeah.
A piece this past July that there's a popular story in Christian circles that's literally too good to be true. According to legend, in the early 1900s, the Times of London sent an inquiry to a number of writers asking the question, "What's wrong with the world today?" G.K. Chesterton responded succinctly and profoundly, "Dear sirs, I am." The real story is just as profound, but less succinct. In 1905, Chesterton wrote a much longer letter to London's Daily News, and that letter included these sentences. In one sense, in that eternal sense, the thing is plain. The answer to the question, what is wrong, or should be, I am wrong. Until a man can give that answer, his idealism is only a hobby. French said that he's thought a lot about that Chesterton quote during the age of Trump, especially as he's seen the new Christian right re-embrace the authoritarianism of previous American political eras. At the exact time when religious liberty is enjoying a historic winning streak at the U.S. Supreme Court, cohorts of Christians, including LCMS Christians, have increasingly decided that liberty is enough.
Okay, so we have a few things there. John, I know you'll probably want to speak to Chesterton, or do you?
Well, I mean, yeah, the David French quote, I mean, excellent source of political ideas. David French, Martin Chemnitz talks about this, the sources of tradition that inform the church's life. And I'm pretty sure one of those sources of tradition is David French.
Yeah. So, and for everyone in our audience, this is kind of showing you where the beating heart of academic Lutheranism is at. It's citing David French in its symposium papers for audiences that are coming in to talk about the role and voice of the church in society today. This is where it's at. But we can look past that just a little bit there. What were a few other claims that stuck out in that little in that little section? So we have this sort of a strange idea that a Christian political bloc is less likely to say that they like their sins or whatever else are the problem, that they are flawed human beings, than the last 40 years of liberals. Liberal people, secular liberals typically, but you can even have Christian liberalism. Is this true? I would say profoundly no. The liberal order has been marked by being, we've been led by people who think that they are fundamentally good, that think that people are fundamentally good. I don't see that in this rising Christian extremist political bloc that he keeps referencing. They seem to be more correct about human nature than anyone else. Do you have anything on that point, John?
Well, I mean, he just admitted that this is a perennial phenomenon. He's like, they're returning to the liberal. I think he said they're returning to the liberal extremism of previous movements in America. It's like, so this is not new then, right? This is a thing that's happened many times before. It's not this isn't some novel problem. He's kind of giving. I think he's kind of like giving up his premise a little bit, because his premise is that this is like a deeply seated American value. Well, if sentiment against it keeps arising every generation, then it's probably not. Probably not a founding value of America.
Right, and then moving away from his premises and just onto an actual external critique. Clearly, this is wrong because America has been marked by an extremely Christian-motivated state until basically the 60s.
Yeah.
Right. So it makes sense that every generation would be evil Christian extremists trying to defeat the liberal order, because that's what the American people fundamentally are. And that's why it keeps coming around every few generations, where there are still people descended from those original Americans. But he makes an interesting claim here, and I feel like we should stop just to heap on the historical irony. He's saying that there's a winning streak of religious freedom victories in the Supreme Court. And this is
Really?
well, this is a strange sort of shifting of the frame. He's accepting what's been thrown towards Christianity, which is in the 40s through the 60s. The First Amendment in the Bill of Rights was incorporated, which means that it no longer just applied to the federal government, as was ruled by the I think it was the first Supreme Court or something, one of the first Supreme Courts, definitely the first Chief Justice ruled in that direction, that the Bill of Rights only limited the federal government. When you get to the 40s and the 60s, this starts getting reversed. The Supreme Court starts using the Bill of Rights against state governments to supposedly protect individuals. During this time of incorporating the Bill of Rights, that's what that process is called, you see all of these Supreme Court bans on religious expression, in especially public areas and public schools. So this protection of the freedom of speech and religious association, and ensuring that Congress does not establish a religion, is now being used against public schools to ensure that they can't say the Lord's Prayer without comment, to ensure that schools cannot allow students to voluntarily use school hours at religious educational institutions. That this was specifically used against the Catholic Church in Illinois to prevent people from learning anything clerical during their public school hours. This was also used in multiple state-level courts, Supreme Courts, to ban organizations like the Gideons from putting religious literature, typically a King James New Testament, on students' desks. And it also banned voluntary forms that students could sign saying they wanted those that literature put on their desk. So the Supreme Court, in order to protect your religious liberties, has banned private organizations from distributing public or religious literature, even if you agree that you want it. I would say that that's certainly extremely Enlightenment liberal, taken to its extreme, where it perverts the idea of what a right is. Because we just have this ethereal concept of freedom of religion and free speech that isn't ever defined and keeps shifting by generation. That's what this guy's arguing is a good thing, I guess. But it's this liberalism, this Enlightenment liberalism from the last century, that is making it necessary now for Christians to defend themselves and their companies from working with people that they think are sinful. They don't want to enable sinful people. And this guy's holding it up as a victory that the Supreme Court has said, fine, you don't have to do that.
Yeah, what the Supreme Court said, you can't be compulsed to use your labor to do a service that you find morally intolerable. Wow, what a great victory. What a fabulous victory that was. I mean, wow. We're not forced to use our labor to do morally reprehensible things. Well, that's just wonderful. I'm so glad that we won that great victory. I mean, this is just so it's like false optimism here. I don't really see where he's coming from.
Well, it's more than just false optimism. It's sort of schizophrenic, because the only reason we're having these court battles is because of the great liberal triumph of the last century.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like 100 years ago, if someone asked you to make a gay wedding cake, do you think any court would have upheld that you have to? Or do you think that would have even been brought to a court?
Yeah, which judge 100 years ago would have taken that case in his courtroom?
Yeah, I mean, what? This is bizarre.
So it's a very strange sort of he's sort of like got two different ideas of liberalism that he will bring out at specific rhetorical points in this speech, where he'll say this is a good thing, and then whenever it comes to battles that are actually happening right now, he'll put that idea of liberalism away and say, well, actually, this is actual religious freedom, where the government rules in favor of Christians for once. That's what we actually need. They're fundamentally at odds, and it's very schizophrenic.
Yeah.
So we'll keep going.
To restore the culture and to protect our children, they believe it is necessary to exercise power to shape a national movement.
Based.
Yeah, no, like wow, how scary. This political movement thinks that it's necessary to have power being used to protect their children and their society. Uh, if only people had thought of this before the Christian right in 2023. We'll keep going. I think that's pretty self-explanatory why that's such a strange thing to say. Oh, hold on. Give me a second. I just screwed up the timing.
Distinct from her. Tearing Catholic state, I am. The real story is just as profound, but less succinct. In 1905, Chesterton wrote.
Here, StreamYards is a bit strange with the with how it runs the video, so just give me a moment, and we will get back to about where we were.
Is only a hobby. French said that he's thought a lot about that Chesterton quote during the age of Trump, especially as he's seen the new Christian right re-embrace the authoritarianism of previous American political eras. At the exact time when religious liberty is enjoying a historic winning streak at the U.S. Supreme Court, cohorts of Christians, including LCMS Christians, have increasingly decided that liberty is enough. To restore the culture and to protect our children, they believe it is necessary to exercise power to shape a national movement. And so for purposes of this discussion, I believe that this anti-liberalism is manifesting itself in a philosophy called integralism. Again.
So yeah, we're
that's
back
not
to
what integralism is. Okay, that's
well, but before we get into this, John, why don't you just give without, we haven't heard him, so you're not going to be countering anything that he's saying directly here, or at least maybe from memory. What is integralism?
Integralism is an ideology mostly based out of South America, specifically Brazil. It was developed really in the late 1800s, early 1900s as a compromise between sort of secular socialists and Catholics in the global South, specifically in South America. It has its intellectual roots in the German historical school and the works of Heinrich Pesch, who was I think he was a German-born Jesuit, a rather important 19th century Catholic polemicist, and also in the encyclicals of Leo XIII. It's a very modern, it's kind of a rather modern ideology. It's had rather limited success in South America. It's weird to use that term because integralism does not refer to the ancien regime. It does not refer to like the fusion of church and state as a whole. There are many times in history where that has occurred, and integralism has specific meanings. It's not when church and state do things together. It's a specific term. There's a long history there. But yeah, I don't know why he's using that term. There's all kinds of other words you could use.
And it's so, and this is where it becomes obvious. He's trying to use a very academic term to describe Christian nationalism as it is.
Yeah, it'd be like saying that like America is going to have a phalangist movement.
It's right.
A very specific thing that has a very specific historical context. Or America is going to have a Baptist party. Like what? Okay. Or historical, those are terms that had specific historical meanings, referred to specific historical movements. It doesn't mean like it's like when TPUSA talks about socialism, kind of.
Right, yeah. It's equivalent to me describing a certain mid-century German regime as national syndicalist, just to sound cool and smart. Like, okay, sure, you pulled out a word that not many people had, especially most average persons, have heard of, but it's wrong. So, there's a strange idea as well, because now that we can see, and it'll become even more apparent as we continue through this, we drudge through it. He's using this to describe Christian nationalists, and he's going to be saying that liberalism is warm and wholesome and happy and fuzzy. It's anti-racist. It's tolerant, as he said in the beginning, citing one of the Bush organizations. It has a place for everyone and all this other stuff. Whereas this evil integralism, as he keeps calling it, these people are non-tolerant, they're anti-liberal, they're going to destroy everything that we hold dear. It's very strange that he's chosen integralism of all things to characterize Christian nationalists as, because as he mentioned, these global Southern movements where integralism not flourished because it didn't actually take
really.
off, but where it had a presence. The thumbnail to this video is the Brazilian integralist movements, their party's flag, using the Greek symbol for a summation. This is very strange because integralists were historically one of the first political groups to advocate not just racial integration in their countries, but like forced conglomeration of peoples.
Yeah.
There was an idea in Portugal and in Brazil that the strifes and divisions in their country would cease if only the state forced different ethnic groups to intermarry to break out of these ethnic divisions. That was the integralist movement. If anyone knows any Protestant Christian nationalists that are advocating that in any sense at all, let me know, because I've usually heard from people like the presenter here that the issue with Christian nationalism is that they're extremely crypto-racist and they're going to resegregate the United States if they ever get into power. Not the exact opposite like integralism would imply. So we'll just stop there and lay down that foundation, and we'll see how he defines integralism. We might compare it to what we just presented here. Let's keep going.
Not Instagram, integralism. Critiquing the many political philosophical commitments of constitutional democracies with a sharp rebuke against individualism, pluralism, and popular rule, integralism longs for a polis and a theology that are fused together.
So, as John just mentioned, that's not what makes integralism unique.
Yeah, that's all kinds. I mean, yes, that was like the Holy Roman Empire had that.
I was about to say the Anglican Church in the modern day is this. If we just took this definition, like the secular government and the church are intertwined. The Church of Sweden is this right now. I don't think that's what this guy is trying to articulate, though. So, strange definition. We'll keep going.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, you broke up there for a second. There's a little bit of delay.
Oh goodness.
Okay.
Good. All right, we'll keep going.
The private nature of liberty embedded in most constitutional democracies. Although rooted in a history that has as its model an authoritarian Catholic state, contemporary integralists represent a broader audience that increasingly attract Christians outside the Roman Communion.
So, John, is that possible? Is it possible to be a Protestant integralist?
No.
Could you give a brief explanation why that would be a logical contradiction?
Because if you take, I'm assuming, I think he'll mention Deneen by name. If you're assuming that this is referring to the post-liberal movement and Patrick Deneen and that the Boston College mob, they're not referring to some like pan-Christian state when they're talking about their worldview, and some of them are quite honest about this. Some of them are very cagey about their goals. They're talking about a very particularist Catholic state that would not be tolerant of any other religion. That's not. I don't think this is what he's identifying as integralism, and what integralism is, and what he's actually trying to aim at, which is like Deneen and the post-liberal movement, are three very different things. And the latter two, I don't think would attract the LCMS crowd at all,
or any Protestant. I met Deneen and listened to him speak this last summer, going into the autumn, and he was very explicit about the fact that he wants an extremely Roman Catholic United States where Protestantism, atheism, and anything else is gone.
Yeah, I mean, he's admitted that more recently. He used to be a little more cagey about his beliefs. He used to be a little more liberal in a sense. But yeah, that's the point of the sort of post-liberal movement. No, it's never going to succeed. It's kind of a joke. And there's circumstantial evidence that it's tied to U.S. intelligence, but yeah, it's not a pan-Christian this is not Doug Wilson in a sweater vest talking about new Christendom. Like, this is my solution to all the world's problems. This is not what Deneen is talking about at all. But I think that's what he's trying to conflate. He's trying to equivocate the two. Now, I think they're both cringe. Both Doug Wilson's like Christendom 2.0 and Patrick Deneen's like weird Fed posty Catholic state are kind of cringe, but they're not the same. And neither of them are integralism. It's right. There's a lot of definitions here. He's aiming this at a completely different target. I don't really get why he wrote it this way. If he would have just called it like dominionism or something and then defined it very clearly, maybe that would hit the intended audience, because this is obviously directed at like Lutheran pastors. That would hit the intended audience. But yeah, I don't really see where he's going here.
Yeah, and it's really strange as well, because he's talking about like the Christian right is going to take up this terrifying idea of anti-liberal integralism. Also, this includes Patrick Deneen and others. I don't think the American Christian right is going to take Patrick Deneen as its main philosophical foundation. Maybe he might have a say, but most people on the American Christian right are not hardcore Roman Catholics.
And even the ones that aren't dumb. You know? They don't like do people honestly think that Pope Francis wants to be the dictator of America? I think the only two people who believe that are Patrick Deneen and, I don't know, someone in like the Jack Chick sphere who believes in like Baptist successionism and thinks the Vatican is going to like install a Jesuit government in America. Right? No one else believes that that's actually going to happen, or that the current Vatican would even want to rule over the United States, because it's silly.
Right. So
the Vatican can't run itself.
This insane idea that's being propagated here might raise the question, why was this guy, with all of these errors that we've outlined before we've hit the halfway mark, and I don't even know if we're going to get through the whole thing. Why was this guy speaking at the flagship seminary's symposium, speaking to all these great academic subjects about the church and its voice in modern society? Because this guy was either invited or he submitted his paper and it was accepted, and the people that accepted it thought that this was coherent, made a compelling point, and was true. Why? Like, we barely hit the thing that he thinks is going to be like this great climax of this paper, and there's so many holes in this that it would be I would be embarrassed to present it, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean, so far he is trying to appeal to a Protestant audience by critiquing a Catholic writer and conflating that with an entirely different Catholic movement from the 20th century.
An extremely anti-racist and all this other stuff Catholic movement from the 20th.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kind the Integralist movement has all kinds of strange quirks, and it's effectively politically dead.
Right. Yeah, so I say we keep going, and we'll see where he takes this.
This essay will broadly define the nature and scope of integralism, highlighting why, even among Lutherans, it is a tempting to philosophy in a world where the church's place and voice are no longer valued. But despite its appeal, integralism remains antithetical to Lutheran theology and will do little to create hope in our polarized world.
Okay, just before, in case that's going to drive any of the audience away, we're not going to focus very much on like the inside baseball of Lutheran theology here, and don't worry, this guy won't either. He's going to make some pretty sweeping points, so we'll keep going.
Someone in chat says, wouldn't it be as dead as proprietarianism? Yeah, and it's also just as glowy. It's just as glowy.
Yeah, so it's not that great. If you, ironically, the best presentation that I've seen of integralism in like any sort of modern or contemporary media was in a Hearts of Iron mod, where one of the alternate history paths is a integralist Brazilian state. And the people did their research, because this was, once again, one of the first modern political movements that wanted to enact anti-discrimination and anti-racism laws. So I don't know if that's exactly what this guy is getting at. Something tells me he just found the word, read like the Wikipedia summary, maybe a book from like a pop political guy, and thought, this is a good umbrella term.
Looks like the flag of integralism looks kind of fashy. So when
does
people
it,
Google integralism, they'll see that and they'll be like, "Whoa, like that
like,
looks pretty bad."
so like that's the thumbnail for the stream, was the Brazilian integralist flag. All that it has is a Greek symbol, a blue field, and a white circle.
Yeah, I mean it's based. I'm sure it's based off of a certain mid-century German
Okay,
flag.
yeah, that's fair.
Remember, like, there's a fascination in the Catholic world with mid-century Germanism. Even if they ideologically don't really align, there's a sort of strange affinity towards them. Probably having something to do with Franco, and it's perceived that the mid-century Germans saved Spain. So in South America, there's a certain affinity towards the symbolism of that.
I see. So we'll carry on.
We'll keep going.
We've established that this is just wacky.
Which in turn begs the question, if not integralism, then what? Well, what is integralism? What is this strange word that I just don't like to say? Put simply, integralism is the fusion of church and state. Historically, a Roman Catholic and a monarchical state. It is the union of bishop and king, the conjoining of the two kingdoms.
So every Roman Catholic country, from the foundation of Roman Catholicism to like 1920, was integralist, is what I'm supposed to get out of this?
Was Sweden during the 30 Years' War in the 80 years? Were they integralist?
Yeah, Lutheran integralists. I guess Henry VIII is the poster boy for integralism, because like that's the most blatant move. So yeah, but we'll keep going. We won't beat this dead horse any longer.
Yeah, keep going.
Thomas Crean and Alan Fimster define in their text integralism a manual political philosophy. Within the one perfect society, we speak of a temporal society or commonwealth which is made up of the same members, and hence materially coexistive with the church, though formally distinct from her. This temporal society is Christendom, and the realms of which it is composed. These may be described as extrinsically perfect societies, and that as long as the church resides in them with the fullness of her rights, they possess perfection.
So, strange omission there. Like, I don't hear this guy's summation and definition from his integralist work that he just cited at all.
Yeah, it's that, and this is also like very like boilerplate. Like any Catholic ideologue is going to have that kind of boilerplate language. It's like a stock clause in a contract. Doesn't mean anything.
Once upon a time, Protestants had this like sort of boilerplate idea as well. Like that was the entire Anglican mission statement at one point, was just to we have the secular society in the form of Parliament and the government, but the Church of England, being as it's so necessary to any Christian social order, just needs to reign within the society alongside the state. Like that's I don't know how this is earth-shattering, groundbreaking, extremist, or integralist, really.
But it is a perfection which, in order to possess, they must submit to the higher power which transcend them. Okay, but how does this exist in America? How does this seemingly un-American or unliberal philosophy manifest in our country? In other words, is this really a thing in 2023 America? I want to take you back to a recent Wednesday evening in Washington, D.C., where 250 members of Washington's conservative intelligentsia gathered into a packed ballroom at the Catholic University of America to hear a speech given by the political philosopher Patrick Deneen. As the audience took their seats, Deneen, who's a professor of political science at the University of Notre Dame, sat quietly at the front of the room. He shook hands with Hill staffers, think tankers, opinion shapers, and academics who approached him to introduce themselves. A few minutes before the event was set to begin, the ballroom doors opened to reveal the newly elected senator from Ohio, J.D. Vance. The first-term Republican who strode into the room made a beeline for Deneen and wrapped him in an enthusiastic hug.
Dang, I went to a conference this summer and beeline for Deneen to shake his hand. I guess that means that I'm one of these scary integralists now.
I mean, Ben Shapiro read Bronze Age Mindset. I mean, we truly do live in a Hellenistic bodybuilder-occupied government.
All right, we'll keep
I
going.
mean, there are all kinds of weird. Anyone in the East Coast elites probably has a connection to Patrick Deneen. He's a very well-connected guy.
Well, Barack Obama gave a favorable review of his book about liberalism, so I guess that means that we had 8 years under what?
Obama Catholic integralism.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
That's a new Hearts of Iron mod we need. Obama's Catholic integralism.
Yeah, so we'll keep going. This is he's setting the scene here, but it's not convincing.
It was a reception more befitting for a foreign dignitary and our elder statesman than a political philosopher. But then again, Deneen isn't your typical intellectual. In 2018, this man burst onto the scene with his best-selling book, Why Liberalism Failed. It was a sweeping philosophical critique of liberalism that earned the praise from figures ranging from David Brooks to former President Barack Obama.
Okay, so he's building up this book to be some great and existential critique of liberalism, and having read it, I wasn't that impressed. I found better liberal critiques from other places, but this just kind of shows the depth of what passes for academic liberalism and academic clericalism today. It's the best critique of liberalism they can find in the West history that people are using is apparently Patrick Deneen. So we'll just keep going there. I figured that'd be good to note.
Since then, he has risen from prominence to a major intellectual on the new right, a looser group of conservative academics, activists, and politicians that took shape in the years following Donald Trump's election. Look, this movement may not have a unified ideology, but almost all of its members have bought into the central argument of Deneen's book, that liberalism, the political system designed to protect individual rights and expand individual liberties, is crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. In pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, Deneen argues, liberalism has delivered the opposite: widening material inequality, the breakdown of local communities, and the unchecked growth of governmental and corporate power.
So this is very interesting in that, like, he pulls a quote from Deneen, the supposed great liberal or critic against liberalism, and each of the premises that he's pulled from Deneen are fundamentally liberal in their assertions. Material inequality is a bad thing and must be rectified by state action. I mean, that is new liberalism in a nutshell.
No, yeah, Deneen is very materialist in his critique of liberalism. If you ever read, I've skimmed through Why Liberalism Failed. It's a very materialist critique. A lot of his sphere does have a very materialist critique of modernity, and his solutions are rather materialist as well. I mean, he's talking just like birth rate subsidies and it's that kind of stuff. It's not, we're gonna have some kind of like assign a spiritual guidance counselor to every American or something. It's very materialist, like, we're going to create the correct financial incentives, and that's going to be our government policy.
Right. So I just find this very interesting in that in this supposed dialectic that he's crafting here, where we have good, warm, happy liberalism on one side and scary, cold, evil integralism on the other. The critiques that he has pulled from integralism by this Patrick Deneen are liberal in their presumptions.
Yes.
Like, a non-liberal society does not care about material inequality. In fact, they would defend it as a good thing.
Yeah, so, I mean, at least like Chesterton was honest that, like, yeah, my society is not going to have like the most material prosperity or equality.
Pre-liberal Europe, famous for its material equality.
Yes.
So yeah, we'll keep going. This is a strange dialectic he's making here.
Integralists, like Catholic teaching in general, holds then that the church and the state are distinct and autonomous within their own spheres because they have different ends: supernatural and natural, eternal life and the common good. Integralists differ from Catholic doctrine in the post-Vatican II era, however, by insisting that the essential Catholic teaching that the church and state should not be separated. Rather,
well, yeah, but Vatican II didn't actually say that, though.
Yeah. Could you elaborate on that? I imagine
that's
you
not
would know.
True. I mean, Vatican II is really fascinating from a historical perspective, because every one of its documents, it was built with an escape hatch in it. The escape hatch being, if we're actually in power, none of this applies. If you read the Nostratate, the arguments for religious freedom and the separation of church and state all have the escape clause of this only applies when we're not in power. So, no, Deneen is not at odds with Vatican II here, because Vatican II was designed to essentially create a framework for when the Roman Catholic Church is not the dominant political authority. If it were to become the dominant political authority again, all of that goes out the window.
Right, and then I would once again like to highlight throughout all of this. This is a member of the clergy arguing that having an explicitly Christian state like existed for the majority of the West's history, and then the offshoots from the West like the United States, Canada, the colonies, if you will, this is somehow fundamentally wrong. I want to know, would he make the same arguments that the Old Testament kingdoms that were faithful, quite famously intertwined church and state, God declared them to be good? Were they wrong as well? I mean, if I look in this man's fundamental documents, the Lutherans hold to the Book of Concord, Holy Scripture, I don't see very much liberalism in there, and in fact, I see very, very many non-liberal ideas that just jump out of the page at me. I don't know that anyone has looked through the Old Testament at all ever and come away thinking, yeah, this sort of happy, wishy-washy idea of human rights and modern liberalism is definitely what we should hold to, or the New Testament for that matter. Because just a switch tone here for a second. This seems very strange that a minister or a cleric would be talking about it in this way. So. That's what I wanted to add there. Are you ready to continue, John?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Alrighty.
Like Deneen, hold that since natural good is ordered to supernatural good and the common good to eternal good, the state should recognize the Catholic Church as the sole legitimate spiritual authority. Further, the state, through its subordination to the Church, should act as its arm in the temporal sphere to promote and establish the Catholic vision of the common good and submit to the authority of the Church in areas where the spiritual and the temporal overlap. Really, though, integralism is just anti-liberalism.
That's a bold claim, because I can think of many anti-liberal philosophies that don't sound anything like he just described, like, say, Bolshevism, National Socialism, Phalangism, Paleoconservatism. I mean, even like Austro-libertarianism doesn't sound that liberal compared to what this guy's describing liberalism as.
No, I mean, and Austro-libertarians actually have a fundamental critique of modern liberalism.
Modern and classical, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you read like Ledeen is one of the major anti-liberal polemicists of the past 200 years. I mean, really, Ledeen's critique of liberal states is really devastating, and he doesn't believe in any of this.
Yeah, so this is very strange. This is embarrassing. is the only way I can put it. I can't imagine being this guy not only recorded this and it was put up and everywhere as like an achievement, but he gave this in front of a live audience, and the fact that he is still recording it and putting it out here shows that somehow the live audience didn't see any of these issues. So this would be personally devastating for me, but I don't know, maybe there's more academic integrity outside of academic institutions. Maybe that, what a radical idea that would be. So we'll continue after that sweeping generalization.
The leading website for the integralist thought, the Josias, defines Catholic integralism as a tradition of thought that rejects the liberal separation of politics from concern with the end of human life.
Have you ever heard of that website, John?
I've never heard. I mean, I've been in Tradcath land quite a bit, and I have never heard of that website. I have no idea what he's talking about.
Do we know any person that is doing things right now, other than maybe like the post-liberal crowd, that has been influenced at all by that website?
No, I have never heard of any. I have never heard of this. What is it, the Josias?
I
Okay, I've
guess so.
never heard of this website before, but okay,
So,
go off.
and you know, this would be strange because according to the LCMS, like I'm in this anti-liberal, dangerous, extremist group that is beyond liberal Christendom. So supposedly I would be an authority on this according to them, but I'm not. You're a Roman Catholic. You've never heard of this. Very interesting citation, but we'll keep going.
It holds that the political rule must order man to its final goal. Since, however, man has both a temporal and eternal end, integralism holds that there are two powers that rule him, a temporal and a spiritual. And since man's temporal is subordinate to his eternal, the temporal must be subordinated to the spiritual.
He says that as if it's
Yeah.
like some
Wow,
terrifying thing, but
That's
like
just like every Christian prior to 100 years ago believed that.
well, let's look at the logical
I mean,
alternatives.
except radical Anabaptist. Unless you're like some kind of radical Anabaptist, every Christian prior to 100 years ago believed this.
Well, no, but I would say even they believe it. They order their temporal lives according to an internal end. It's just they don't do it using the government. But so let's look at the alternatives that he's presenting here. Now that he's given us the dour deadpan of how terrible that's supposed to be. You know, if this was in a movie studio, there would have been a big red sign that lit up for the live audience that said "gasp." Yeah, so, what are the alternatives? Well, are people supposed to put their temporal life, their temporal ends, on the same plane or level as the eternal ends? Well, no, that's antithetical to not just Christianity but any religion. Like that is atheism. If atheists can believe in an eternal end, what about having a temporal life superior to an eternal end? Well, that doesn't make any sense. It's like it's putting an intermittent phase, if you will, above something that definitionally has no beginning or end. It would be folly, I think, would be what it would be described as in Proverbs. Like, which one does this guy think that we're supposed to do?
Yeah, it's weird. Like, you could argue that like Deneen is basically using that as a mask to promote his like bizarre form of state socialism. But the wording in and of itself seems completely uncontroversial to me, and I don't really see what he's getting at here.
Yeah, there's many critiques that you can lodge of post-liberalism, integralism, the actual movement, not this sort of umbrella term this guy's made it out to be, or anti-liberalism. But this scary idea that they believe that temporal ends should be subservient or inferior to eternal ends is a very strange thing to pick on. Once again, especially for a Christian clergyman. Isn't this guy's whole vocation centered around people ordering their temporal life in accordance to an eternal end?
Yeah, I mean, wasn't he? I mean, it sounds like he's a military chaplain.
Right, he's a military chaplain.
What does the military do? What does the U.S. military do? I'm curious what he thinks the U.S. military does, because, I mean, from my perspective, it looks like the U.S. military uses temporal power to subdue the rest of the world to the values of the United States government with force.
So, yeah, that just completely... Don't ask too many questions, as has become clear. It becomes more incoherent the more questions you ask. But like, I'm in awe that an ordained minister is telling people that this is somehow wrong.
I mean, did he ever see combat?
I have no clue.
I gotta. I mean, I'm very curious. It's very. I don't. People who have seen combat have a very different outlook on power and morality than people who have not. I'll just put it that way.
Right. So maybe he'll clarify this in a second. Maybe he'll say that no, that's not the issue, but the way it's... Maybe he'll give your critique. I haven't watched this in a week, so we could just have been floundering about nothing. Let's see if he elaborates.
It is generally believed that liberalism arose as a practical solution to a practical problem: the Reformation. The Reformation.
So he's just buying into like his entire enemy's framework.
Well, before we get there, no elaboration. Like, he leaves us on that note.
Let's let him read the next paragraph. I'm curious.
Let's hear how liberalism is a solution to the Reformation.
That led to confessional differences, which in turn led to war and liberalism, which consisted in an essential way of the effort to separate politics from theological matters, and that itself imposed a way of establishing peace in the wake of such differences.
Okay, I don't think that
Okay.
anyone would claim that's true, though, because I believe this is something that Ralph Raico, if I remember correctly, I think has a book about this. Liberals, especially Christian liberals, during the Enlightenment, even one of the largest waves of atheism across the West to exist, they weren't separating faith from politics.
No.
Or theology from politics.
I mean, like Isaac Newton, John Locke, all the figures of what we would consider the Enlightenment, unless they themselves were explicitly atheists, were anti-atheist.
Well, even the atheists, you can make an argument, had a political theology that they were promoting because of their religious beliefs, of which they were repudiating religion. Like this,
it's also just not true that liberalism just showed up where there were differences.
Yeah, that's very true.
So Germany. Okay, let's go back for a moment. Let's say he thinks that the Prussian system is illiberal. Well, the Prussian system was an attempt to homogenize differences, right? The unification of Germany and the creation of a single German church was an attempt to homogenize differences and prevent conflict. Well, France had a religious homogenization. They went through and systematically exterminated all religious minorities, and yet they had a liberal revolution. Why?
Yeah, and
it's worth thinking about, because it didn't come from. By the time the French Revolution got started, there was no true religious minority, except in the aristocracy. There were probably some deists who were crypto deists. They weren't going to go admit that openly, but there was no nominal political minority in France at the time.
And in case people think that these Enlightenment liberals, or at least some of the bigger names like Newton, were like softer or more watered down than their conservative counterparts, Isaac Newton, if I remember correctly, spent the last part of his life searching for Old Testament dragons in the Alpine region of Europe. Yeah. Like that's more faith and determination towards it than I think most moderns would ever even have the potential to have.
Yeah.
Like how many modernists or modern people would go searching for dragons in the Alpines? I doubt any. How many modern politicians, if they had control over Egypt, would criticize their government because it wasn't Christianizing Egypt with full force? I doubt any of them would do that. This is a very strange idea, and he's also positing that you can live outside of religion in some distinct form part of your life. This is very interesting to me in particular. Because this seems to be an idea that people have, that you can have academic pursuits or live a part of your life or discuss anything that does not ultimately tie back to metaphysics or religion or theology. The reason that I'm under the minor ban right now is because I kept talking about theology online. What else are you going to do? Name one part of human existence that does not tie back to metaphysics, theology, or faith? There isn't any. So this guy's made up a fake category right now where he's putting these extremely devout Christian liberals throughout history as if they were just like political and religious separationists. It's like he went to Thomas Jefferson.
Separation of church and state, contra to what people like Deneen might claim, was not entirely a liberal invention. Well, and the first 200 years of liberals, especially in the British tradition, were certainly against it.
I don't know that Rhode Island Baptists would be considered liberal in the 1700s. In fact, they tended to vote very nationalistic in American elections. But this idea of separation of church and state, as if it's in the foundations of the legal code in our country, it's not.
No.
This guy's saying that, like, he's lamenting at the beginning, these Americans have never read their governing and founding documents, woe is us. Well, has this guy? You can control F right now, a PDF of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the other amendments that came afterwards. You're not going to find separation of church and state. So I think that we should keep going, because this is where we're going to get into some real wacky territory now that we've established this. All the ideas have been established now. We're just going to go down a roller coaster.
Integralists believe that this peace no longer exists. Patrick Deneen's critique of American liberal democracy has moved several Catholic writers to reconsider the Church's relation to it. And among the best of these efforts since Deneen's Why Liberalism Failed came out earlier this year in a provocative essay published in the American Affairs entitled The Eclipse of Catholic Fusionism. Kevin Gallagher, the author, declared therein that the prominent Catholics who worked with political conservatives during the 1980s and the 1990s to defend free market principles were adulterating the faith with alien ideas and ignoring the American Church's long-standing skepticism of free market economics.
Okay, so does this guy want separation of church and state, or does he want people to be defending free market ideas on the basis of their religion? Which is it?
That's also like kind of not true prior to like the 1920s that like Catholics opposed the market. The American Catholic Church has a very different history than its European counterpart, but
yes, yeah.
Whatever.
I mean, if you look at the all the socialist movements in the United States history, except for the Socialist Party with Eugene Debs, so the Democratic Socialists of America, the Communist Party USA, and all these other types, were founded by Roman Catholics or people who grew up in Roman Catholic households, because they had this idea that American capitalism was too atheistic or too non-spiritual.
Yeah, but it's a distinctly 20th century phenomena.
Right, yeah. So, but like, was this guy one? Like, we've just spent, I guess this guy has been going on for 15 minutes without our commentary, saying that how terrible it is that these people are intertwining faith and politics, and then he's saying that he's this terrible integralist has swayed Catholics and accused them of adulterating their faith by intertwining faith with economic policy. So, which is it? Do you want
Also,
faith
like,
intertwined or not?
What were they? I mean, it was intertwined. I mean, it was the Cold War. Like, that's the context. It was the Cold War.
Right, and so this just asks a bunch of questions. What does this guy want? I don't think he knows. So, do you have anything you want to add before we keep going?
No.
Okay, well, let's power through.
In Gallagher's telling, American Catholics that helped shape the Republican Party's politics from the Reagan presidency through those of George Herbert Walker Bush and George W. Bush had to make ideological compromise that sapped Catholicism of its mission.
This happened with anyone that was involved in those two presidencies. Like, yeah, these great people that helped the Reagan and George H.W. Bush presidency. Like, that's I guess this is where like the vestiges of academia are, or vestiges of conservative academia are, like or liberal academia, according to this guy. A very strange rallying point to just announce there. We love Reagan and Bush. So we'll keep going though.
And shrouded the truth of its spiritual and moral claims. Supposedly, what is needed to restore that mission is a Catholicism more critical of the mainstream of American thought. And so young Catholic intellectuals like Gallagher born during the post-Soviet Pax Americana, they seemed to know little about American Catholicism before the reform of the Reform under John Paul II, and before the general decline of Episcopal leadership culminating in the clerical abuses of 2002 and 2018. Free market Catholics like Richard John Newhouse, Robert Novak, and a company during the 1980s is where they joined the conversation. They saw Catholic intellectuals show greater sympathy for the Republican Party and global capitalism than for Catholic social teaching on such matters as assistance to the poor or on stewardship of the natural world.
Okay, that's an interesting claim and all, but both of those presidents that this guy just mentioned fundamentally enshrined social welfare into our form of government. They took the only political opposition in the country to those ideas and made it for it. So, I mean, I know this guy is we're getting very meta analytical here. So those guys that are looking at this are right, but probably not for the reasons that this guy just said. But
yeah,
also,
they're both looking at this. Both he and his like ostensible opposition are accepting the like Michael Moore version of history of like the past 50 years, where Bush was like this like capitalist despot who privatized everything.
And same with Reagan, as if he
Yeah.
didn't permanently cement social security programs into this nation's social fabric. And so now that we've established that that's the narrative this guy's going with, what do we think he's going to do? Is he going to defend these supposedly liberal free market principles, or is he going to concede, yeah, maybe they have a point, we should do better at having state welfare for the poor and all this other stuff, but not in this anti-liberal way? Which do we think he's going to do?
I do wonder.
So we'll keep going.
They saw that allegiances rewarded the perpetual delay of challenging abortion and utter failure in preventing the Obergefell decision, which was written by a purported Roman Catholic Associate Justice of the Supreme Court.
So, interesting thing, he trashes the Trump presidency at the start of this, saying that it's leading to the rise of this scary Christian movement on the right. Who ended these things? Like, whose appointees actually changed these things? Right. Scary Trump guy, pseudo-dictator, asterisk, appointed people that actually did at least devolve abortion and allow parts of the country to end it. And this is the guy, by the way, that David French, the person that this guy cites, and as well as all these other sort of conservative academics who thought that Trump isn't a real conservative. He's not paying adherence to Burke, the member of the Whig Party from Britain, or to William F. Buckley or whatever else. He's not a real conservative, and he's just going to destroy the American right, and he's basically a leftist. They're trying to outflank us from the right using their academic ivory tower stuff. Which is insane because this sort of conservatism that they're advocating for perpetuated abortion for far longer than this scary Christian movement under Trump did. So, what gives? I don't think they have an answer. So,
Yeah.
Ready to continue?
Yeah.
Not only to them had sectarian liberalism succeeded in capturing American institutions, it had captured prominent members of the church. One then can probably begin to understand why these Catholics believe that American liberalism is what caused things to turn out so differently from what Richard John Neuhaus and others had promised.
That's a strange idea, considering that it's a lot of American Catholics that went into the political movements that comprise current American liberalism. That's a historical inaccuracy that's just being perpetuated here. But I think that Catholics might have a stronger claim against especially the United States government after World War II, because it started to incorporate these Bill of Rights ideas onto state governments and preventing them from actually being Christian. I think that might be why the Catholics are more angry than because free market principles were a thing in the 80s. But that's just a guess on my part. John, maybe you have something to add to that.
I mean, I think Deneen actually believes all the stuff he says, but in general, yeah, I think you're right.
So we'll keep going.
But why, though, is integralism attractive to those outside the Roman communion? Why is it attractive to Lutherans? Why am I, as a Lutheran pastor, talking to Lutheran pastors about something that seems so patently Roman Catholic?
Very good question.
Yeah, it's something that we've been wanting to know so far. So what's the answer?
Let's see the answer.
Yeah. Integralism has really been brewing for some time. Back to our buddy Deneen. In South Bend, Deneen took advantage of his distance from Washington to step back and integrate the various strands of his new critique of liberalism into a single theoretical framework. When the final product of that effort, published in January of 2018, Why Liberalism Failed, came out, the book changed both the trajectory of Deneen's career and the debate about the future of the American right. Deneen had written almost all of the book before the 2016 election, but his argument spoke directly to the sense of political disorientation and dissatisfaction that propelled Donald Trump to victory. In the abstract, Deneen argued liberal regimes promised their citizens equality, self-government, and material prosperity. But in practice, they gave rise to staggering inequality, crushing dependence on corporations and government bureaucracies, and the wholesale degradation of the natural environment.
Okay, but that's an entirely materialist critique. No, this is a critique of Deneen, not what he's saying. But yeah, I mean, Deneen is just a materialist.
Yeah, but like this idea that they promised equality and didn't deliver. Are we supposed to want equality? Is that a moral good? I don't think so. Like that's fundamentally wrong. This whole thing about equality. So he's putting this critique up of Deneen because this pastor obviously believes that equality is fundamentally good, which is absolutely insane. I don't know how you could give an honest reading of scripture and come away thinking, yeah, everyone is supposed to be absolutely equal. It's absolutely insane that someone could think that. But then he's putting up Deneen's argument where he's saying that the problem with liberalism is a practical one. It didn't really deliver equality, it just promised it. And he's saying that it's bad for even questioning that it did or did not deliver equality. There's no room in this discussion that he's crafting here for people who think that equality is bad, or that it's not ideal, or that it's hellish. This voice that people actually believe does not exist now. And it's because of dialectics like the ones being created here. But this is all very interesting to me. I think we've established enough by now that this man is tying political ideas to faith, despite claiming that he's trying to separate them. I think that's abundantly clear by now, which is very ironic that especially the flagship seminary of the LCMS would entertain such an idea, because they just got done going through a series of purges earlier this year, nominally because, among other things, people were tying the faith to political movements that they didn't like. So if I'm just reading the LCMS's actions here, just looking at what they're doing and what this guy's saying, the fact they invited him and put his video up online as if it's something they would be wanted to be associated with, it seems to be that these conservative denominations, the LCMS included, don't actually mind if you intertwine faith and politics. They just want it to be the sort of neoconservative Bush-Reagan way that you do it, and not any of the unrespectable backwards ways, like if you tried to revise any sort of historical ideas regarding which political movements were actually as bad as they're claimed to be. If you do that, you're wrong. But if you intertwine your faith with Reagan and Bush Sr., apparently that's just fine. It won't get you pushed out of the church. It's a neocon-occupied church, if you will. So that was just something that I wanted to get out there. John, did you have anything to say to what we've been listening to so far?
No, I'll have more things to say in a bit, but let's just power through this next section.
Yep. All right. We will take just a section to listen. No more small breaks.
At the same time, liberalism's incessant drive to expand individual freedom had eroded the non-liberal institutions, the nuclear family, local communities, and religious organizations that kept liberalism's impulse toward atomization in check. But how did it become so popular? Look, Deneen's political vision didn't end with minor tweaks to the Republican Party's agenda. As Deneen explained to his audience back at Catholic University, the event that I was describing earlier, the major fault line in American politics is now no longer one between the progressive left and the conservative right. Instead, the country is now split into two warring camps. The Party of Progress, a group of liberal and conservative elites who advocate for social and economic progress, and the Party of Order, a coalition of non-elites who support a populist agenda that combines support for unions and robust checks on corporate power with extensive limits on abortion, a prominent role for religion in the public sphere, and far-reaching efforts to eradicate the concept, the idea that you know as wokeness.
All right, so that's basically just the Democratic Party before like 1970 something. Wow.
Also, like someone in chat pointed this out, and I think it really irks me when people use the word nuclear family incorrectly. A nuclear family is two parents and two children living in the same house and then splitting off with the children moving out. Well, it doesn't mean a big family. That for some reason, like conservatives use that term incorrectly all the time, and it's very irksome.
So if we want to talk about the historical form of the nuclear family, you see it in Anglo-Saxon, Danish, and generally more, at the time, poorer and independent parts of Europe. So central Italy was communitarian in its family structure.
Yes.
Every generation of the family lived in the same household. Central Europe and France had what you would call an authoritarian family, where the oldest child and then their oldest child and whoever else would stay in the same household. Everyone else would disperse. And then you had the Anglo-Saxons, the Danes, and that sort of part of North Germany, South Scandinavia, tended to be much more brutal, much poorer. This is where you get the nuclear family, where the children disperse, go settle out more land so that they can survive and have something for their children. What tended to happen was not the sort of atomistic creation that especially a lot of dissidents talk about now, where nuclear family means that you just go off and abandon your roots and your family. What tended to happen is that you would have a lot of the same family members living around each other, just not in the same household.
Yeah.
So that they could have control over more land, more resources, and survive longer. I would say dissidents and conservatives get this idea wrong. There's nothing inherently wrong with the nuclear family, and what we have now in the modern day is most certainly not the nuclear family.
Yeah, and they call it, but when a lot of conservatives say nuclear family, they mean a two-parent family unit. They mean an intact family. They don't actually mean nuclear family. It's a misuse of the term. And I suspect it's being misused here. But that may be a bit uncharitable. But
right, yeah. So but we'll keep going.
In his new book, Regime Change, Patrick Janine calls on anti-liberal elites to join forces with the Party of Order to wrest control of political and cultural institutions from the Party of Progress, ushering in a new non-liberal regime that Janine and his allies on the right call the post-liberal order.
So it's just liberalism, but with some small Roman Catholic tweaks. Sounds like a great repudiation.
Yes, having
right.
Pope Francis be the dictator of America would be very different than America today. It'd be so different.
Let's keep going.
I think that integralism's popularity, at least among the right, is due in large part to a conservatism that is really in disarray. American conservatives have always contained many competing factions, but anti-communism nonetheless united them.
That is a very, very big giveaway right there. If you know anything
that's
about
just
what
Buckleyism.
happened. Yeah,
that's
if you know
just solid Buckleyism right there. It's also just dishonest because that's not how the anti-Soviet unified front in the West was not created through disparate groups coming together. It was created through, after World War II, a faction of conservatives kicking out everything to the right of them and establishing a new right wing.
A new right wing, which was immediately in coalition with liberal war hawks.
Yes.
That's specifically what it was. So, and this isn't liberal meaning like classically liberal, basically an American conservative. These were like new liberal FDR types that disliked the Soviet Union more than they did anything else. So they allied
a lot of
these
Trotskyists. I've got a grudge.
Yeah, and that's this is what you'll read from anyone in the era who was kicked out of the American right, basically because they weren't sufficiently anti-communist enough. This is where you get quotes from William F. Buckley saying we need to tolerate a totalitarian bureaucracy on the American shores in order to defeat the Soviet Union.
As long as it's not fascist, though. Fascism is bad.
Right. Fascism is the greater evil, but now that it's gone, focus on the Soviet Union. This is a gigantic giveaway because no genuine conservative in America, no genuine right-winger in America would say that anti-communism was a uniting goal. It divided people quite extraordinarily. This is how the isolationists were destroyed in American society, was because they were seen as communist sympathizers. That if the United States did not basically just centralize everything that it needed, establish a global empire, and bureaucratize the American way of life and destroy it to combat the Soviet Union would win. Therefore, isolationists are sympathizers. This is how you destroyed any genuine right wing in America. And moreover, on top of that, even the people that remained in the right weren't even necessarily united around anti-communism. This is where you get ideas that so you have domino theory, obviously, and that's what motivates this sort of liberal and left-wing conservative coalition that John and I just articulated. But we would support certain communist movements so long as it wasn't Soviet aligned. It had nothing to do with communism. It had everything to do with anti-Soviet.
That's Cambodia.
Yeah. So
I mean,
yeah. I mean that was a big giveaway on this guy's part, though. This is I think that's probably the biggest hit that he could have given himself out of everything we've listened to so far. So I say we keep going.
Keep going, yeah.
Neoconservatives, religious conservatives, and libertarians all agreed that communism was evil. The collapse.
I mean, Certain
Yeah, okay.
neoconservatives didn't actually agree.
Plenty of people believe that communism was evil, and also got kicked out by Bill Buckley, and created essentially Gen 1 of what we today call the movement.
Yeah, and this is interesting as well, because if you actually read these ex-Trotskyite neoconservatives, they never say that communism is necessarily evil. This is where you get the communism is good in practice, or good in theory but bad in practice
Yeah.
idea. Like that whole trope of, well, communism would be really, really good if it just worked. That these are people that don't think that communism is evil. This is what haunted the American quote unquote right wing for decades, for generations. Was these people who didn't actually believe communism was evil, they just thought it was destructive. So I think we'll keep going now.
So the Soviet Union put their disagreements on center stage, though, in conservative politics. And so the movement began to collapse on itself. Its factions grew further apart. Then the 21st century wrecked their credibility one by one. The Iraq War crushed the authority of foreign policy hawks who had instigated it. These neoconservatives co-opted American political power to impose democracy on Muslim nations.
I wish their political power was destroyed, but they're still like making comebacks on the Republican Party.
Nikki Haley is running for president right now.
Like this whole idea, it's trendy now for the left wing to say Bush and Blair were war criminals because they killed Iraqis. But we're not actually, you don't hear them ever talking about anything else that happened unless they're like a Chomskyite. The average person has a bad opinion of the Iraq war right now because it's just dragged on for so long. Very few people are opposed to these wars because of the intent itself.
It wasn't refuted when it happened.
Right, exactly.
The Iraq war did not refute neoconservatism, since the objection to the Iraq war, took about 5 to 6 years to even start having any political clout.
The fact that Mitt Romney was the Republican Party nominee in 2012 kind of proves that this is not how it worked.
Yeah, it wasn't like, even today, it's very standard for both sides to support interventionism.
Yeah.
I don't think it really was refuted.
And in fact, it's so standard that if you give like the classic American right-wing foreign policy view of we should not be involved in any conflict at all unless we're attacked, you'll get called childish and kicked out of whatever caucus you're in.
Yeah, I mean, the only guy on the Republican stage is this like weird Indian tech CEO guy with a squeaky voice.
Right, and then before him, it was Ron Paul who was actually like citing these old
the gynecologist. Like the gynecologist who was like he was old. He was on the older side when he ran. I mean, this is not mainstream, even in the right. So.
Yeah, so I don't know what world this guy is talking about. Maybe it's because he has strong sympathies for the neoconservatives and he sees that they're no longer in the omnipotent, dominant position that they were in the 2000s. Maybe that's why it seems like they're out of power.
There's factions there's an anti-war faction on the right long before Iraq War II.
Or before Iraq War I.
It was strong in the 90s. There was a substantial, early internet message boards were full of anti-war right-wing content.
Right, and even before then, the entire foundation of an American right-wing movement was isolationist.
Yes,
this is an absurd historical inaccuracy, and it's barely even historical. Like, this guy lived through this.
Yeah,
so, we're living through it. So yeah, we'll keep going.
But their war went worse than anyone imagined. The Great Recession challenged defenders of markets.
I don't know that that's true either.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that the strongest defenders of markets in the United States predicted the Great Recession like 6 to 7 years before it happened.
Yeah, like how did the Ron Paul movement exist if the 2008 recession debunked the concept of markets? Why can you go back to 1996 and find articles predicting that Fannie Mae is going to cause a housing bubble and a financial crisis?
Yeah, why can I find like C-SPAN footage of Ron Paul in the House telling people that the way the monetary system is structured is going to cause a bubble in a specific industry and being proven correct down to basically like a year's range?
Yeah.
I think that this is just because the only sort of thought that this guy is either entertained or been exposed to at all as sort of this neoconservative free enterprise and free markets are good within reason. Free market is good whenever there can be some government intervention, but it's still basically free. I'm sure it'll have no consequences whatsoever, so we can just pretend that this is a free market. Well, the actual people in American society that defended markets have been extremely critical of the policies that this guy would probably say are free market. It's
Yeah.
I once again, this would be intellectually embarrassing if I gave this in front of a crowd of people. So we'll keep going.
And unlike the Great Depression, elites didn't shift to socialism. But the downward knocked the wind out of the pro-market elite. Even the center right wondered whether American economic policy had moved too far right.
What is this framing? Right. Even like mainstream Republicans, like Ben Shapiro types, were arguing that this whole thing was made worse by government intervention. Like, they may not have been getting it exactly right, but I don't know. Yeah, maybe Mitt Romney probably thought that we went too far to the economic right. Woo. Like, is that the conservatism or the liberalism that we're supposed to be in favor of? We'll keep going. We're beating this horse now.
Rising economic inequality, together with the shrinking manufacturing base, reinforced these concerns. Opposition to free markets grew. The LGBTQ plus movement convinced American elites to oppose Christian sexual ethics. Evangelicals and Catholics who opposed same-sex.
Sorry, what was that, John? Ooh, are you still there?
Wait. The LGBTQ movement convinced American elites to oppose Christian sexual ethics? What is he talking about?
I don't think that's true, because I think you'd lose Christian sexual ethics way before anything that happens in the 2000s. Like,
okay, that's a very strange framing device.
We have elites supporting abortion as birth control in the 70s. I don't think there was an LGBTQ plus movement in the 70s that was lobbying these elites to support that.
I mean, it existed, but it was like NAMBLA. It was very like the queer rights movement in the 70s was horrendously unoptical.
Right, and
had no political clout. At least not outside of a handful of cities like San Francisco. Maybe there was some political clout there, but that's kind of strange. That's a very strange framing of the history.
Right, and then something else that I find that always aggravates me because it's just accepted is the idea that the manufacturing base in the United States shrunk because we followed free market policies too hard. When the entire reason why the manufacturing base can shrink in the U.S. is because you have like state treaties mandating specific trade relations with countries like China that wouldn't exist if people were just trading normally. And then you have a state-controlled money system that incentivizes the manufacturing base to go elsewhere. Like, is that a free market? I don't know. I don't think I would call it that, but it's just accepted. It's accepted knowledge, and it's wrong. So I think we'll carry on. This is getting bizarre, but we'll get to the kicker. We're very close to it.
Marriage unintentionally convinced millions of these Christians that they hated gays and lesbians.
Maybe this guy's cadre, but I don't think most Christians actually bought into this. Maybe the main line. Maybe it's because this guy wants the LCMS to be the main line, so he's using their narrative. But that's not true either. Like the whole opposition to the gay stuff was that you would see these untrendy, backwards, redneck evangelical types saying that it was actually harming themselves eternally by acting out on their homosexuality. Like, yeah, maybe it's the wrong kind of Christianity for this guy. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's not a big enough ivory tower for them to sit in. But I don't think that this is a true narrative.
And in 2013. The Supreme Court, staffed with Republican appointees, legalized same-sex marriage. In other words, social conservatives had lost. Indeed, social conservatives lost most battles of the culture war. They couldn't ban abortion despite staffing the judiciary with many conservative justices, at least not until the landmark 2022 decision in Dobbs versus Jackson. One must understand how greatly these losses affected conservative Catholic intellectuals. The liberal democratic state would not sanctify us and protect our virtue, but it did promise to protect our fundamental human rights.
I don't think it did.
Okay.
Like human rights as a doctrine only comes about in like the Jimmy Carter era, where it's like fundamentally influencing United States policy. And even then, like I don't think anyone. Why would a Christian accept the idea of human rights? That this isn't some edgy thing like haha human rights don't exist, Yugoslavia haha funny things. This is a human rights are a very atheistic concept that promotes a moral good from an atheistic background or an atheistic foundation. Why would Christians accept this? If we look at what are commonly accepted as human rights, they are fundamentally anti-Christian societally. You have to protect homosexual expression. You have to protect transgender expression. You have to protect all these other things. So I don't know why it's relevant to any Christian audience whether or not the liberal state upheld human rights. Maybe it was sarcastic. Maybe he was sarcastically saying it, but like something tells me this guy quoting Bush Foundation people probably accepts human rights as a legitimate concept. So we'll keep going.
Ultimately, integralism is based on a perceived threat of Christians. It's popular, even among our circles, because people believe that liberalism is bad. People believe that liberalism is an attack on our faith.
Yeah, they just believe. This has no basis in factual reality, experience, or even the last 20 years of political developments. It's just perceived. It's believed.
He's going to get to a really interesting claim in a second.
Yep, all right.
I'm curious to your take on it.
Let's go.
David French, in a New York Times piece this summer, recalled, years ago, I laughed at claims that Christian conservatives were dominionist in disguise, that we didn't just want religious freedom, we wanted religious authority. Yet now such claims are hardly laughable. Arguments for Christian nationalism are increasingly prominent, with factions ranging from Catholic integralists to Reformed Protestants to prophetic Pentecostals, all seeking a new American social concept, one that explicitly puts Christians in charge.
That's an interesting rewriting of history. The first time Christians would be in charge is if this scary Christian extremist movement gets power. Like, have you read a history book? If I look at the collected writings that I have of U.S. presidents and I just flip to any of their speeches, there is a 95% chance they mention providence or God in a favorable manner as a guiding force for their policy. And this is a collection up until Woodrow Wilson and including him. So, like, the progressive movement was notorious for this. They would co-opt providence and God and faith to promote their progressive reforms. Like this, really, this is the first time this has happened? Scary. Absolutely frightening. So, did you have anything you wanted to say to that, or should we keep going?
No.
Okay. All right.
The motivating force behind this transformation is a powerful sense of threat. The idea that the left is coming after you and your family.
A sense.
Yeah.
A sense that the left is coming out after your family.
Like, yeah, that's correct. An accurate perception that something true is occurring.
To be perfectly honest, this is distasteful after what the NHS just did in the United Kingdom. It's also distasteful after
they literally like murdered a child.
Yeah, even
when
after
another
a foreign
country
government
had offered to free of charge take this child to undergo treatment.
So it's distasteful for that reason. And like, are we going to forget that case of the was he a Texan father or something, where his child was basically taken from him in the court system because he refused to?
And there's multiple cases like that all over the country.
Yeah. So it's perceived that the liberal establishment is coming for you and your children. Perceived. It's absolutely dumbfounding, malicious. One might even say.
This mindset sees the Christian use of power as inherently protective and the desire to censor as an attempt to save children from dangerous ideas.
Do you not want parents to censor what their children see? Is that the position we're taking? Or maybe maybe the issue is that the state is censoring, in which case we're just returning to how the state operates now, number one. Like, that's not even a return, it's just doing it in a different way. And number two, it was doing it in a Christian sense up until like the 1960s. Woo! Yeah. Like I was raised by members of my family that were alive before or during the New Deal's implementation, right? So I have a living generation in my family that I am connected to very, very deeply that remembers a time throughout their childhood, their young adult years, and early into their family formation where this was just how things were. The state was a censorious regime in favor of typically Christian social orders. That's just how it was. And this is some terrifying society it's like we're reverting back to a dark age. I think they turned out much better than any generation is going to turn out under this current system. Like, once again, this is an ordained clergyman saying all of this. Censorship is bad. Like, this is and another thing. This is a German denomination. Christian censorship is bad. I'm mind boggled by that. So, ready to continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
The threat of the goodness of the church and the virtue of its members, in other words, comes primarily from outside its walls, from a culture and a world that is seen
No, that's wrong. The threat comes from inside, and the perception is the threat comes from inside. That's why there's this conflict. That's why you're addressing it. Right? It's not right. That he's mischaracterizing the argument. The problem is not that there's a hostile outside. The problem is that the enemy is inside the gates.
Right, or the enemy has control.
That is where the feeling of existential threat comes from.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's an extremely salient point. Otherwise, it wouldn't be existential; it would just be a struggle.
Right? You can have a what is it, a Weltanschauung or whatever? What's that like worldview conflict that exists in every culture?
Right.
It's a different case when you are not only combating the outside, but you're combating your own hierarchy.
Right.
That is a different kind of conflict, and it's a much more existential conflict.
Exactly, and this is something very interesting because one might, now that we've kind of gone through, we know what he's trying to say here. He's just using academic language to obfuscate it. He might feel threatened himself that these traditionalist Christian movements are probably going to unseat from power people like him and his friends, who very clearly, by the topic of this whole essay, do not believe that their concerns are founded. They might even support some of the things that this Christian movement are against. I would say they might feel threatened, and that's probably why he's downplaying all of this. He's minimizing it. He's saying don't overreact. Basically, you can hear that from the rhetorical devices that are being used right now. And anyone that thinks that we're reading too far into this, try speaking to someone without.
The primary threat is not external. There have always been external threats. There's always an external threat. That's nothing new.
So we'll continue. This is it gets more egregious as we go on, and we've yet to get to the main thing. So we'll keep going. We're right by it.
Worse in virtually every way. So what's our objection? What's our Lutheran objection? And they're edited in their edited volume from 2021, One Lord, Two Hands, Essays on the Theology of Two Kingdoms. Matthew Harrison and John Pless offer us several pieces on why Lutherans should reject integralism.
And after the last year, we know that Matthew Harrison and John Pless are very, very good at resisting cultural subversions.
Subversion-resistant gentlemen. Okay.
One of these guys was, in fact, one of these guys was directly involved in the creation of that catechism that you can find on my channel. It was the last live stream that went on here. And Matthew Harrison was the one who flip-flopped from going against it after the public basically put too much heat on him. And then he started saying anyone who criticizes this in any meaningful way is a hateful bigot, basically. So this is what this guy's going to use. And I understand this is getting sort of sectarian to some people. Just imagine that this is any other conservative denomination in the United States, and the same generalities probably hold true. You probably have people in your conservative churches and church bodies that have this exact same philosophy that this guy's been articulating. That's why it's on this channel. If this was just Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod Inside Baseball, this stream would not be happening right now. So let's see what they have to say about the separation of church and state.
First, from the great Hermann Sasse, where we see the very premise of integralism is antithetical to Lutheranism. Sasse writes, "The Lutheran Reformed confessions explicitly expressly teach that the divine order of governing authority is bound to no particular form of the state. Assertions such as that the monarchy is the only Christian form of the state, which has been advocated by individual theologians, contradicts the teachings of the Evangelical Lutheran Church.
I mean, that's already a very dubious claim. If I can make such an assertion, just the idea that the idea that there is no better state Christianly, like, this is an Aristotelian point, granted, but I don't know if that actually bears out. You know, why did God reign as a monarch in the Old Testament? Why is Christ called the King of Kings? Like, this isn't just like slogan theology where I'm saying Bible says king, therefore king good. I think that there might be a deeper logic to where if the omnipotent creator of the universe has adopted this title and this form of rulership, maybe there is something to it. I don't know, but just discarding it out of hand seems very sloppy.
Yeah, well, he's also, it's not, that's in context, what the claim that Christianity is not bound to any form of the state means is that if the particular form of the state in existence at the time of the writing of the confessions, in that case, the Holy Roman Empire, collapse, Christianity would persist. That's their point. They're talking about, they were, the drafters were referring to the essentially persistent nature of the church over time. They weren't saying that there is no preferred form of government, or that we are not aligned with Charles V, the Holy Roman. I mean, that's the entire point of the confessions in the first place, was to ally with the Holy Roman Empire.
And this is also very strange as well, because this isn't addressing the point about an integralist, as this guy keeps calling it, at all. Because the integralists are not saying that the church is subordinate to the state. They're saying the exact opposite, that the state is subordinate to the church. We haven't actually addressed anything in this quote related to this guy's point. So I think we're ready to keep going, aren't you?
Indeed.
Next, Anders Ingren highlights the problem of confusing the two kingdoms, of this fusion that integralism seeks. He writes, Luther insists that it is of primary importance not to confuse the two kingdoms. Each must be true to its divine mission. Through the gospel, God rules the spiritual kingdom, forgives sins, justifies, and sanctifies, but he does not thereby supersede or abolish the earthly kingdom. In its domain, it is to rule with power and the sword, and any attempt to rule the world with the gospel is a double error, carrying a double penalty. First, the gospel is destroyed and becomes the new law to take the place of the old. Man makes Christ into another Moses, as Luther put it. And in addition, the world suffers, to quote Luther. What would be the result of an attempt to rule the world by the gospel and the abolition of earthly law and force? It would be loosing savage beasts from their chains. The wicked, under the cover of the Christian name, would make unjust use of their gospel freedom.
That's a lot of giveaways there that I almost really just don't want to articulate, because it's there's so many of them. So first we have the claim that integralism, as this guy keeps defining it, as this guy has defined it, is confusing secular government and churchly authority, which I don't think that, I haven't heard that from anything.
Yeah, I don't think that's
that's
not what his ostensible opponents are doing.
Right. If anything, it sounds like the integralists have a much more defined separation, or distinction, I should say, not separation, but like they can point specifically what a churchly function is and what a secular function is, much more than perhaps any of these other people could. Just because they say the church has been taken out of society, this has these bad consequences, therefore the church needs to be restored to what it was doing beforehand or to some new thing. That there are distinctions there. They are recognizing that they are separate entities and that they aren't intertwined and do separate things. I don't think this guy is addressing any of that. So that's just the first thing. And then the second idea, that you can't have a Christian polity that rules with the gospel. Very vague idea. I don't know
what does
quite
that
what it
mean.
I don't know either, but it sounds like he's just.
Is that an actual quote from Luther? Like a paraphrase quote?
I'm not going to dig into the quotes and citations. I'm just going to take him as is. Okay. We'll just grant him that, so we won't get too far into the weeds. But what does he? We'll infer from context clues. What does he think ruling through the gospel is? Well, he's saying that it would let the animals loose and people would abuse their gospel freedoms. So to him, the gospel just means just you have no responsibilities, everything is fine, go and do what you want. That's what the gospel is to this guy, because he thinks that if you have a polity that has as its foundation the gospel in secular government or in churchly government, like it's actually ruling people, he thinks that, well, people are just going to use the gospel to excuse themselves. Is that what the gospel is to you?
I think if that's a Luther quote, I think Luther means it in a very different way than he's intending it. I think what the original point of the quote, if that is a quote, is if you rule by a sort of, if you rule without the sword, you'll create like essentially like runaway bestialism.
Right, which makes sense. That would make sense.
That's not fundamentally against his ostensible opponents.
Right.
In fact, if we take, I mean, knowing how Luther writes, it sounds like that he's agreeing with what this gentleman calls integralists, even though they're not. And there doesn't seem to be a disagreement there.
Right, and this is a very strange thing to me, because this guy believes, I have no doubt he believes, that these integralists want to rule with the gospel, and they're just going to subject everyone to this terrible Handmaid's Tale state of weird Christian authority that's sort of traditional but not. Like, I have no doubt he believes that's what they think. It's just that whenever he hears they want to rule with the gospel, he immediately jumps to, well, the gospel means you can do whatever you want, so that's what people are going to do. Which is it's like you're forgetting half of the gospel. You're forgiven.
That doesn't really make the point he's trying to make.
Well, I think it makes a much more fundamental point, and that's what this guy conceives the gospel as. It's a very it's an extremely impoverished view. Go and sin no more. Okay, so you're forgiven. Yeah. This stuff is not held against you. You have salvation eternally. What now? Well, you are a fundamentally changed man. Like, if you are not a fundamentally changed man, you are not actually trying to live in accordance with this. What's the point? It's folly, is what it is. It's like, so we've basically just taken the gospel here, according to this guy, as a concept and isolated it to the moment of forgiveness, and that's it. There's nothing that comes after you hear the gospel. You're not supposed to act it out. You're not supposed to live it. There's no nothing that you are supposed to do afterwards. It's a very strange and impoverished view that I think he's articulated here. He's sort of given up here.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely on board with integralism, but I am most certainly not on board with what this guy thinks the gospel is. So, ready to keep going?
Yeah.
Finally, we see from Erlang-Tegan that a philosophy like integralism distorts the two kingdoms. This doctrine does not provide us with rigid, inviolable borders between church and state, so that we always know how to solve the conflicts between the two. Our Lord.
I mean, it sounds exactly like that's what it's
exactly
doing.
What the point of. I mean, he just read these like manifesto clauses from websites I've never heard of before, but all of them seem to make a very clear distinction.
Yeah, and the fact that they exist as like a reactionary movement right now seems to imply that they understand that there is a church that has a proper role and it's not being fulfilled. If they did not distinguish between church and state, they would not be able to make that claim. That's just a logical contradiction that he's articulating here. This pastor, I'm amazed.
I just don't get the point. None of this really matches with. It's not bolstering his argument.
So yeah. Well, it's bolstering his argument in front of the intended audience, which is he has thrown out big name Lutheran theologians that aren't too traditional reactionary. So he has like ethos appeal now. So I think we can keep going though. This is the best part of this whole thing comes after this section.
The Lord sees the border clearly. We do not. What is clear is that the powers of the two are not to be mixed or confused. Let's be clear. Integralists abolish the two kingdoms. They get rid of the very principle of Lutheran understanding of church and state. Among Denin's most outlandish proposal is the suggestion that the separation of church and state should in fact be abolished. Pointing to the rising deaths of despair, Denin insists that it's not enough to ensure the people's freedom to pursue essential goods of human life, such as religious faith. Religious liberty for him is no substitute for piety. Deneen isn't ever explicit on how a new elite should positively guide ordinary folk to faith.
Okay, before he starts critiquing practicality here, there's two things I want to point out. I most certainly am not an integralist, but I do not believe in the separation of church and state. It's a very modern and even like a sort of anti-constitutional idea. This modern idea that we have of church and state. If you were just a normie, hardcore constitutionalist, you should not believe in it because it's not how the Constitution worked until the '60s, until the '40s, until the last century. Basically, after an FDR staffed court took over things. This is not. If you're a constitutionalist, you have no reason to believe in the separation of church and state as is being articulated here. If you're a liberal, you don't either. There's nothing in liberalism that mandates the separation of church and state. As John and I pointed out multiple times, this is something foreign to the old liberalism that was staffed by hardcore Christians like Newton. So liberals don't really have a reason to believe this. Paleoconservatives most certainly don't, because American history in particular is dotted by laws that are foundationally Christian. There are state churches. There are Christian blasphemy laws in the country. All of these ideologies, whatever you follow, Austro libertarians don't have to believe in this either, by the way, for obvious reasons to do with the mechanics of the state. So the sort of idea that the state should enforce secularism, a separation of church and state, is a foreign idea to everyone except neoconservatives and maybe some modern liberals. It's
at least in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, it's completely foreign.
So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. The second thing I wanted to point out is look at the arguments that he's dealing with once again from Deneen. Entirely materialistic. More people are dying, therefore this thing should be pursued because people died less whenever it was in power. Has nothing to do with the principle that John and I are articulating. He's picking apart materialism, that's new liberalism with a Catholic face, basically. And he's saying that this is what the integralists believe. Well, it's clearly not. So let's keep going. We're about done and into the last section.
Besides supporting the life of prayer, what does this mean? Is there going to be a national establishment of Christianity? Is religious liberty jettisoned? Does this mean that excluding from civil participation or even legally prosecuting those who don't profess his faith?
That's how most European countries functioned until after World War II. So
that's how America functioned historically, but go off, King.
One just has to look at one of the most quirky American religions to exist in their history to see that the state of Missouri literally legalized the execution of Mormons because they were blasphemous.
Yes.
So, and that was on the books. Obviously, it wasn't being practiced. That was on the books until 1976. So, let's jettison this concept that we've never really held to until FDR and Lyndon B. Johnson, and go back to how things were originally, which was his original appeal at the start of this video. It's very convoluted. So let's get through.
The proposal is so unlikely it seems Deneen is writing for the sake of provocation. In the United States, with its declining church attendance and hodgepodge of Christian sects who seem to break apart more than they join together.
Are they supposed to join together? Is that what we're aiming for here?
I mean, that like Elka and whatever it's called just conglomerated together. I mean, they do. The main lines are actually consolidating. So
yeah.
This is like the 40,000 Gorillion denominations argument. I don't really see his point, except it's impractical. But like Deneen's proposals are impractical. Everyone knows that.
Sure, but this guy's like, are we supposed to join together? Like that's a great question. Obviously, it would be good if all Christians were the correct kind of Christian. Yeah, every denomination believes that. But how do you actually achieve union? Well, typically it's not through converting people. Typically, it's through compromising on beliefs. Is that what this guy wants?
Does he support the JDDJ? I mean, I know the LCMS officially disavowed it.
Yeah. Like I'm sure he would say that's the wrong kind of joining together. But like, every historical example of Christians joining together is what this guy despises. The Prussian Union of Churches was joining together. Yeah. Like, is there like, I guess I guess in modern Lutheran Church history, we'll take into our communion evangelical Lutheran Church in America breakaways. I guess that's what this guy wants. He wants the leftovers of the hardcore mainline church. Is that it? This is a very strange thing to just point out. So let's keep going. He's going to make a comment about the LCMS, and then we're going to get to the fun stuff.
Unless you're in the LCMS, it is difficult imagining that Baptists, Catholics, Anglicans, Methodists, or even Missouri Synod Lutherans would willfully subsidize the other.
Yeah, okay, but that's American history up until the 1840s.
Yeah, I mean,
What
Germany
now?
literally does that to. I mean, that's like the German system today, but whatever.
Yeah, but
Okay.
just sticking over here, something closer to home. That's literally how our polities worked
Yes.
up until the 1840s, right before the Civil War lead up really got into full swing. So, yeah, it's hard to imagine that happening, but it did. So what now? Let's get through.
So now what? What do we do with this rising tide of integralism? How do we as Lutherans respond to it? Well, you may not want to admit it. It may cause you some sort of inner angst or pain. But liberalism, ultimately, is a pretty darn good thing.
Is it? Okay. All right, this is where the really egregious part. If you thought everything was strange up until now, get ready for this next part. Let's listen to it.
Back to the Harrison Plessfelling, this time from Stephen Paulson. The thing that
unless I am mistaken, and there's a second Stephen Paulson, this is the guy that caused a controversy with the most recent catechism because he is in the ELCA.
Oh, yeah.
So, unless I am just grossly mistaken, and there are multiple of them, or perhaps homonym names, that this is the guy being quoted favorably right now. Let's hear it.
Liberal democracy does better than any other government is that it seeks to reduce the violence of the competition of recognition in a state by demanding equality among its citizens. It does this by bestowing or identifying what are called rights. In the end, these rights are either the means of allowing the pursuit of happiness, as with American founding fathers, or the ends of goals of life itself for someone like Hegel.
So we'll work backwards there. That whole section that you just quoted was absolutely insane. So no actual liberal believes that the state grants rights or bestows them, as if the rights are generative within the state.
Yeah.
And moreover, they don't believe it's even recognized by the state either. That's the whole point of self-evidency. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Well, then we don't. That's saying that you don't need the state to recognize them, otherwise they don't exist. This is a fundamentally flawed concept that's being used here. And moreover, liberal democracy reduces conflict by establishing total equality. Every
Source?
single
Yeah, okay.
Well, more than that, counter source. Every single major conflict, mass murder, if you will, in the last century, was a result of people trying to recognize full equality. The Bolshevik government was foundationally was predicated on full equality, and led to immense bloodshed. The Mao system, same thing. The French Revolution, which is going a couple centuries before, same thing. World War II, you had the liberal democracies of the West causing an immense amount of bloodshed for the Central German system, which acknowledged full equality for certain people, which caused immense bloodshed to the Bolsheviks, which we've already established were crusading for equality. I don't know that this does reduce conflict, if I'm being perfectly honest. In fact, if I'm to look at all three of those systems that we just looked to and the body count that's associated with them, or the killing rate system out of those three modern sides from the last century seem to be the one that I'm not allowed to say anything good about. And that's not an endorsement of the system, that's just saying it's the least bad. So I don't know that this claim is in any way true.
Even if we just look at the abortion rate in liberal societies, I mean, as presumably this guy is against abortion.
We can hope.
I would assume so.
Yeah.
I mean, we just look at if we consider that as a form of mass genocide, you're far beyond anything that existed prior to the 1800s.
Right, and it's not just genocide. I'm not going to buy into that narrative either. It's omnicidal. There's no the only person who has discretion in a regime that allows abortions who gets killed is the mother herself committing killing of her own offspring.
Yeah.
I was trying to find some fancy side word there, but I couldn't. That's the only way that you can have discretion. So if there is a side going on right now in Western polities, Western liberal polities, it's not genocide. It is very much omnicidal, and it's happening at the hands of people that are supposed to be the main protectors of the ones they're killing. So we have two things here. If this guy is against abortion, and we can presume he is, generally good guess. I'm not going to accuse him of being for it. Then this great liberal system that's pretty darn good, as he said earlier, allowed this to happen. And not only allowed it to happen, it provided the legal foundations for it to happen. This regime that we have, where you can have some states where abortion is on demand up until who knows how long into the pregnancy, this was considered too radical for the East German communists. The first and only
considered too radical for the modern German state.
So this is just an interesting historical fact that I think some people lose sight of how insane things are right now. The first split vote in the Volkshammer in the German Democratic Republic was over the issue of abortion being allowed up until like 6 weeks or something. And this was the first time in East German history that their main legislative body did not have a unanimous vote, and they couldn't just decree it. They had to go through the vote because they knew it would be controversial. Up to 6 weeks, I think it was. And the New York Times over here at that point in time said, look at these crazy East Germans legalizing abortion.
Yeah.
And then the next decade, we have even more liberal abortion laws.
Yes.
Across the country. So, I don't know. Is liberalism pretty darn good? Is it reducing conflict? I think millions of mothers killing their own children is a pretty large conflict. It's just hidden. I don't. And once again, this is sort of going back to sort of like the Lysander Spooner logic. Well, either liberal democracy believes this, in which case it's evil, or it didn't prevent it, in which case it's evil. Yeah. One or the other. And that's the only way it can be, considering the fact that we're in it right now. It happened. So which is it? So I think we'll keep going here, because it's only going to get better.
Really, I think it's either liberalism or utter chaos. It's really liberalism or nothing at all.
Yeah, our society right now is a...
It's nerf or nothing.
Our society right now is a hallmark.
Like this, but it doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah, well, it's observably not true. Our society right now is famously a hallmark of stability. We've never been more united and stable in American
stable,
history.
Functional regime right now.
I'm not going to make the historical mistake of saying we've never been more divided, because then you just get midwit saying, haha, civil war, idiot. But we have most certainly had more stable times, and in those times we were less liberal. I'm not going to paint a causal connection there, but I am going to say that this is just not true. This idea that it's either chaos or liberalism. In fact, it seems to be that new liberalism in particular, the more that we follow it, the more chaotic the country gets. The civil rights movement caused a lot of chaos, especially in southern towns, where you would have protesters bust in from the north, and they would commit all sorts of heinous acts in front of people on church steps and in parks and all this other stuff. You can find this in the county court records of multiple Alabama hamlets. That movement can only come as could only result from a country that had to have the New Deal enshrined into its political system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a form of new liberalism. What did the civil rights movement result in? Well, we've completely opened the borders, because having immigration quotas was considered to be discriminatory, and that's an abridgment of civil rights. So we've had record amounts of immigration, and as we know, our society has never been more homogenous and stable in regards to ethnic strife, never been more homogenous and stable in regards to voting demographics and whatever else, especially on the border with Mexico, never been more homogenous and stable. Actually, that first part may be true. Maybe it is more homogenous now than ever, but certainly not more stable. And then, so that's the immigration part. abortion can only come about as a result of new liberalism, which this guy certainly seems to be fully in line with. He certainly repudiated classical liberalism, which itself is extremely flawed, but we're not even going there. So it's led to abortion existing because abridging abortion is a abridgment of civil rights. So far, this whole doctrine of rights under this new liberal regime seems to have been not only chaotic, but a regime of mass murder, unjust mass murder. So this is an absolutely insane claim. Did you want to add anything, John?
I'll add more later.
Okay, all right. Let's keep going.
The now what? The so what? A better liberalism. Walsh and McKinsey from the George W. Bush Foundation remind us that we may not have a choice in the matter unless we're willing to do away with democracy altogether. James Madison's Federalist Number 10 illustrates how diverse and competing groups, for better or for worse, are an inevitable outcome of free societies. In his essay, Madison details how one could suppress faction in America's new republic. He defines that term as a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who were united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interest of the community.
So, two things there. This is a fantastic piece of mainstream rhetoric that's kind of destroyed the discipline of American history. When Madison is advocating for federalism, it is not the new American Republic. It is he's trying to usher in the second iteration of an American government, because the Federalists did not like especially the economics and tax policies of the preceding one. It didn't allow them enough central control. So this myth that Madison and these other people founded the first and monumental American government is rewriting of history. We had a much freer and a much more decentralized government beforehand. But that's just a side point. How the Federalists define factions and pluralism, if you want to use that word when discussing these interest groups, is not at all how this guy is meaning it. The Federalists did not have an idea of a ethnically heterogeneous society or a nationality heterogeneous society. They had a ethnically homogeneous society, at least in terms of regions of Europe where people were coming in from. They had an idea that there would be a predominant language, so no multilingualism to deal with. And they had an idea that even though there were different denominations, the character of the country was always going to be under the umbrella of Christianity. When modern people like this reverend talk about pluralism, that is not at all the foundational structure they're operating with. They're talking about a country that has multiple different ethnicities, even nationalities, languages, religions, religious families. So not just Abrahamic religions, which itself would be a highly unstable system, but dharmic systems are coming into the country. You have folk religions that are here and being revived even, atheism, agnosticism, and all these other types. The idea that he is quoting this document as if it is anywhere comparable to what we're dealing with now is almost an insult to the original writers of the Federalist Papers, and I'm not one to speak highly of them. John, did you have anything to add on that? I'm sure you might have something to say.
Yeah, I think my point is basically yours. That this is not what the Federalists meant by factionalism in any sense of the word. The concerns of that political era were fundamentally different. Plus, I don't think that Deneen even opposes pluralism in the way he seems to mean it.
Explicitly not. Deneen goes on Twitter and calls people racist because they aren't supporting multi-ethnic working-class populism as a right.
Yeah. So I don't really, again, this is another bizarre quotation of a historical document, but in a totally ahistorical context.
Yeah. So we'll keep going. He's about to. The climax is coming up for this whole thing.
Madison, who was wary of faction, suggests that this threat could be cured in one of two ways. Either remove the very liberty from the system that allows factions to develop, or ensure that everyone in society possesses the same opinions and interests. About the first remedy, Madison says, Wishing to abolish liberty because it nourishes faction is like wanting to annihilate air because it can cause flame, because it can flame fires. Both wishes are folly and impossible. And about the second cure, Madison correctly writes, as long as the reason of man continues fallible and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed.
Yeah, it's just I have a feeling that the founding fathers like Madison, if they saw the certain opinions that were being articulated today, might write some sort of a clarification there, considering that these founding fathers are also the ones that instituted some of the first censorship laws. Like
Yeah.
this is a basic historical context. Thomas Jefferson, the more anarchistic liberal member of this cohort of founding fathers. Not that he is a Federalist necessarily, but he supported the dismemberment of sodomy and rape perpetrators in his home state of Virginia. Like, I don't think that that's the pluralism that this guy is talking about. just maybe I'm wrong there, but I don't know if this guy would be entirely on board with the founding fathers' platform of harsh blasphemy, censorship, and anti-sodomy laws. Just a guess. Ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Given these alternatives, a commitment to pluralism is the best path for managing our differences. Absent that, it's easy to imagine escalating violence among groups, encroaching authoritarianism, or even the dissolution of the Union.
Yeah, imagine if that was going to happen.
That would be crazy. I
in the
can
modern
imagine what
world.
that would be like.
Like,
Well,
and it's not even the modern world. This has been happening ever since the Civil Rights era. As soon as you have the Civil Rights Acts passed, you have a sudden and sharp increase in the frequency of racial riots across the country. Like, that's not a historical thing. It's ongoing. You don't really get that before the Civil Rights Act. So you get a few things that you know off the top of your head, like the Summer of Violence in 1919, because it's an outlier. But now there's just so many different racial strifes that are happening continually that it's hardly news anymore. The only time you get news is when cities are on fire, and then we have to commit to pluralism. Otherwise the Union might fall apart. Yeah, is this not what we've been doing for the last 30 years now? A commitment to pluralism? Is the Union healthier or weaker than 30 years ago? Presuming that it's something that is worth being preserved.
Yeah.
So, like, and that might be something in and of itself as well. He's just presuming that the Union is a must. It's a given. We must preserve the Union,
Which historically wasn't a liberal assumption.
No, and I was about to say, what if liberal principles say that secessionism would be more peaceful and more liberal? What happens then?
Yeah.
The Confederacy was led by a cohort of diehard classical liberals, pointing to their rights to secede as a liberal right.
Yes.
What now? I don't know that he has an answer, so we'll keep going.
So yes, pluralism is a big deal. The more heterogeneous America becomes religiously, ethically, racially, ideologically, the more our country's stability and endurance will rely upon it.
I don't know that that's true either.
That's a fascinating... So, and why is that happening?
Yeah, I was about to say, if we have to have a solution to this thing that's by the way this is being phrased, a problem, why is the problem happening to begin with? Wouldn't it make more sense to solve the problem than to just bandage over it?
Yeah.
So, let's keep going.
Yeah.
Strengthening the democracy that we all love depends upon nothing else. But what does that mean for us? What does that mean for theologians like you and I, for church men and women? Liberalism? Integralism? How are we supposed to make sense of this stuff for our people? First, I think we need to grapple with a few questions that Lutherans want to ask. Does the two kingdoms, or as I like to refer to it, the two realms paradigm still work? Heinrich Borkman in the Harrison and Plessville reminds us that Luther thought the solution of the problem as he confronted it required, on the one hand, the ruthless separation of the world and the kingdom of Christ as well. On the other, the governance of both of them by the will of God according to the two modes of his love. To be clear, I agree with Luther here.
Glad we have that clarification, because genuinely it has not been clear as to whether we are holding to historical a historical view of this until now. Something tells me we aren't going to. Something tells me this is a rhetorical trick, because he sneaks that in at the end. The little quote where Luther says they should both secular and religious government be beholden to the will of God. Something tells me we're about to contradict that.
Why does he prefer to call it the two realms?
I don't know.
Instead of the two kingdoms. That's
I don't know, but
little Freudian.
I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess that perhaps calling it a kingdom might be going against some of the
point a little bit.
Yeah. So let's keep going. Let's see if he contradicts this idea that secular government should be beholden to the will of God and not just be some secular institution that merely exists.
But the lack of faith within governments today and amongst culture in 2023 America and around the Western world, I think, in every way, makes this paradigm somewhat problematic. The assumptions that Luther brought to the table about the people and the government and their belief in God simply don't exist anymore.
So the solution is to bring that back, right? The solution is to bring that back, right? I need that 4-panel Star Wars meme for this. Like, that's a...
Yeah.
This is a... Let's see where he goes with this.
I think Paulson makes my point when he said that the state cannot function without what Luther called general faith, since states do not establish themselves as much as they try. The state is built upon the prior states of church and family. So here's the fault line of liberal democracy. And I would add, this applies to integralism as well. Look, I'm not ready to give up on our beloved reformers' two realms theology, especially for the church and how we understand our place in the world. But if we want to maintain this paradigm, we, that is the church, must fundamentally change how we think of and approach politics, especially conservative Americans. We cannot be naive to think that politics and government will change society. In every way.
Yeah, imagine politics and government changing society. That's such an outlandish idea. I don't even know why he brought that up. It's almost as if the whole talk that he has been giving so far is predicated on the idea that we had a liberal society that actually a liberal government that impacted society. It's insane. We'll keep going. That's we've demonstrated how insane the premises that he's operating on are.
We must stop our incessant focus on things political. And that includes me, somebody who has worked for government for years, somebody who has been involved in politics since I was 18 years old. Because the desire to recreate a new Christendom is really nostalgic. It's a failure of imagination. Christendom was not a necessary outgrowth, a requirement of evangelizing the world for Christ. Another path could have been taken, possibly one with a better outcome.
Okay, so let's just brainstorm a little bit here, John, quickly. What other alternatives are there for the Western world if you don't have Christendom, but you still have Christianity? What are the alternatives? Like, are these like Germanic tribesmen and Norwegian Vikings just going to suddenly adopt the idea? Yeah, church and state should be separated in the year like 700. Is that the alternative?
We can write some great alt history fantasy where Germanic tribes created this sort of like confederated anarchy, and there was no authority and evangelization. But okay, well, failure of imagination. Well, what are we looking towards? What is the positive vision here? I'm not seeing. What is his proposal here? I don't quite understand.
I'm interested in the failure of imagination, John. What else is there? But what do you get besides Christendom that is remotely good in the West history? Atheistic government and then private religious lives? Is that the alternative?
I mean, I just don't see where the two have been separated successfully.
It's or I don't even know if I don't know what his point is here. It's a failure of imagination. Let's see if he elaborates. Does he elaborate? Let's go on.
Christendom was ultimately a political failure that led to a 300-year revolt and hatred for what is perceived as Christianity. In the end, Christendom as a mode of political life was not necessarily good for the spread of the gospel.
Really?
I think that that's just complete bull. Like, if I look at the evangelization of the world into Christendom, or into Christianity rather, it all happens under Christendom. Those evil empires that he said were sparking backlash at the beginning of this towards liberalism, they all spread Christianity far better than any other system at the time. Western Europe and Eastern Europe Christianized as a result of Christendom. The Lithuanians would not be Christian. The Prussians would not be Christian right now either if it weren't for the explicit use of force and governmental power to make them Christian.
Yeah, this is like this myth that like forced conversion is ineffective. I mean, that's just clearly not the case. I mean,
He's going beyond that. He's not saying forced conversion is ineffective. He's saying that conversion intertwined with any political power at all is a failure.
Which happened when?
Well, I mean, I think
where did this happen?
I think the implication is that Christendom was established by political means to evangelize people. Which, yes, I would agree with that. But he's just saying it's a failure for spreading the gospel. Is it?
I mean, it lasted a pretty long time. So.
It lasted a pretty long time, and there are more peoples in the world now that have access to it as a result of Christendom than would have had access to it otherwise. Unless this mystical, imaginative state that he's saying that we're too incapable of imagining suddenly presents itself.
Yeah,
like
you could think of a world where Christianity just stayed with the Desert Fathers and was this strange little ascetic mystery cult practiced by funny guys who lived in caves, but it would be a footnote in history.
Yeah,
it would be of no interest to us today.
And like this, I'm also in awe because this guy has he's been in state power. He admits it himself. He's been in politics since the age of 18, and he's been hyper focused on it and all this other stuff. And despite his age and his experience, he hasn't seen how political power can influence the lives of people. Really?
Yeah, I don't see his positive vision.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going. Let's see if he articulates something. I'm in awe that a Christian clergyman would be saying that Christendom was a failure for the spread of the gospel. I think that's just empirically false. So yeah, let's see if he elaborates.
Why then do we want to do it all again? Let me also say liberalism needs to adjust. And here's how liberalism adapts. Liberals must both unite to protect liberal order and concede some political independence to non-liberal communities of faith, people like us. Consider an analogy with the early American colonists. England allowed religious communities to immigrate and form their own polities, which reduced religious conflict and allowed diversity to flourish. Today, we no longer have a geographic frontier.
That's not true. If you look at a certain demographic map, certainly you can see that there's certain temperature zones where certain people won't go into.
Yeah,
like that's like the fact that we can drive on cars means that geography doesn't matter anymore is a very sort of like an armchair historian's idea. Do you have anything you want to say there? Maybe you have more experience with that than I do.
We can set up a Lutheran state in Siberia. Why not? There's plenty of empty geographical frontier. That's not the issue.
All right. Let's keep going. I don't think we're going to get our elaboration addressing our point earlier about what this alternative to Christendom was supposed to be. But let's hear what he has to say about liberalism now that he's actually critiquing it slightly.
Nevertheless, liberal states can create a new frontier. For instance, they may allow charter cities. These institutions exist and could expand. Anti-liberals will insist that liberal order cannot accommodate these communities because liberalism is necessarily the enemy of these communities.
I mean, that seems to be what the courts are saying, certainly.
Do you think that that any liberal government in existence today is going to allow you to set up a confessional Lutheran city-state?
I want
to say some things that are very unoptical, but
John, I'll go one step further and I'll say that if that did happen and we took the average LCMS congregation and we set up a charter city that was specifically for that congregation, it would be struck down by civil rights lawsuits because it was too integrated or too segregated.
Literally illegal.
Yeah, it would not be diverse enough.
I mean, what do you think? There's going to be like Irania in South Africa? You think there's going to be lots of little like Lutheran Iranias in the Midwest somewhere, and the U.S. government is just going to allow that to happen?
Like, and this is absolutely insane to me because these clerics will use arguments that segregation still exists. It's just through more convoluted means. They will speak against redlining, and they'll speak against monetary segregation and whatever else. That was one of the things in the new catechism that was released earlier in January. So the idea that we can have these charter cities that are explicitly confessional would not stand for this reason alone, in that they would be accused of segregation. If we took
because
the
they
entire,
would be. It would be segregation. That's like Hoffa's entire point in Democracy, the God That Failed. Is like, yeah, it would literally be segregation, and that's a good thing. The problem is that what he's proposed here isn't a path forward. It's a desired end state.
well, but here's
It's not
the point,
actually practical.
if we take the entire LCMS, for example, and we put it into one state, like we'll say we kick everyone out of the state of Kansas or whatever, and we give it to the LCMS, and every LCMS person relocates there. Not only would you have segregation by religion, which is what we explicitly just did in the thought process here, but you would be accused of racial segregation, and the liberal order will not tolerate that. They make that abundantly clear. That is the entire foundation of our legal system right now, is the specter of segregation must be destroyed anywhere and everywhere that it could potentially result. This is fantasy right now. He accused others of a lack of imagination. I wish I had the naive optimism of thinking that the current order would tolerate essentially segregated charter cities that were explicitly Christian. They won't, and they're going to use that against you. You would either have to invest in diversity hires, or you would have to explicitly toy with the demographics of your church, which
you would have to have
funnily enough the LCMS is doing.
Okay, the only way you would ever get this done is you have sufficient military force that the U.S. government just doesn't think it's worth shutting you down. Like, the Mormons maybe could have done this in the 1800s, and almost did.
Well,
that's the closest we would have to some kind of like autonomous, self-governing, segregated territories that could live by their own illiberal values.
We can't even. So this guy's going to, spoiler for like the next 15 seconds, he's going to go on and say liberalism can just incorporate these movements by having them live in their own little crazy world.
Explicitly can't.
You use the example of Mormons, and this guy would hate them too, not because of their wacky theology, though I'm sure he would dislike them for that, but they came up with their own intertwining of church and state called theodemocracy, of which they govern the territory of Utah with. Like, this whole idea that you can have these religiously segregated states or cities or charters or whatever, and that's where you can have your anti-liberal systems within liberalism, that this guy would oppose that. Because every single time that it was tried in American history, it was explicitly anti-liberal, and it got crushed by the U.S. Army. That's what the Mormon Wars were about. So, we'll keep going. We're near the end.
But the anti-liberal thus pits communities of faith against liberal order.
Yeah, I don't think it's the anti-liberals doing that, but that's pretty self-explanatory to anyone that has eyes to see in this current world. So let's keep going.
But the genius of political order is its capacity to adapt and avoid stasis. Liberalism once co-opted socialist insights. It then co-opted conservative insights. Now it can incorporate the wisdom of religious anti-liberals. I still believe in the American ideal.
That's quite the funny assertion, because I don't know that this guy's articulated any American ideal throughout this entire speech now, except for maybe like post-LBJ Americanism. Maybe he's articulated that. I'm in awe at this whole thing. John, do you have anything you want to say to that little section?
No, I'll reserve my comments for the end.
Okay, let's keep going.
I still believe that America has some deep and worrisome problems. As Adam Smith said, there's a great deal of ruin in a nation. I think Deneen's descriptions of some of them are fairly unobjectionable, but I think that his prescriptions, the prescriptions of integralists, will likely join the musings of previous frustrated conservatives and reactionaries who are unwilling to accept that Americans just aren't into them.
Historically doesn't bear out, but okay.
It'd be interesting to see his examples of who he's referring to here.
Like general electorate, because he just got through saying how he was citing David French talking about the specter of Trump. Seems like the electorate seemed to think it worked fine.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
Because we're Americans. We're pluralists. At our heart, we're liberals. And as much as it may pain me to say it, liberalism remains, at least for our politics, our best hope. Thank you.
All right, so that was a
okay.
that's how the clergyman ends. There is that liberalism is the best hope for American society. So we went through into pretty excruciating detail the specific things and the philosophical things that were wrong with all that, John. But once again, and I articulated this in the middle, the idea that the LCMS has gone on basically a giant purge against people for intertwining their faith and religion with political movements past and present, and saying that that's fundamentally wrong. And then this clergyman gives this paper as a presentation in the flagship seminary of the LCMS, kind of intertwining Lutheranism with liberalism, political liberalism, it burns, is what it does. It's I would not believe that this was possible if I hadn't seen every other act of projection that has characterized the last 30 years, either in history or by my own eyes.
I mean, would this guy actually support the creation of self-governing city-states for his own political enemies? Especially if he sees them as an existential threat? I mean, would he support, like, the Mahlerite city-state ruled by Cory Mahler? I'm serious. Like, that's kind of silly, but no, I don't know if he would.
The answer is obviously no, and that's because we heard this. He's praising the neoconservative establishment of what they consider to be American conservatism / liberalism. And the answer is obviously no, because there's the unstated first principle for these types, and that if something is beyond the pale or not respectable in opinion, it is not allowed. It doesn't matter what principle they have just articulated. If you are not in the respectable crowd and you are using their stuff as they intend it to be used, you're doing it wrong because you're not in the respectable crowd. That's their first principle.
He also didn't cite the Bible once, which is kind of funny. Like, no mention of the Bible, not one.
Yeah, well, that's what those like hick Southern evangelicals do. The backwards ones. We're better than this. We
quote David French.
Yeah. So and then this was pointed out to me by a good friend of mine earlier on. Notice how this guy's speaking to a Protestant audience, and he is painting this whole movement as fundamentally Roman Catholic. That is not unintentional.
It is a weird framing device.
No, it's not weird. In fact, he knows exactly what he's doing there, I'd argue, or he is lucked into it. Most American Protestants still have a vestige of being allergic to Roman Catholicism. So if they start hearing, or if they start saying, this is Roman Catholic, you dear Protestants, they're going to automatically just poison their mind against whatever the idea is. It could be right or wrong. But that is a very genius rhetorical move on their part, and might be the only thing that he did right, at least from their perspective, throughout this whole talk. He is pitting the idea of a Christian society, a Western Christian society, as being fundamentally a Roman Catholic idea. That is a rhetorical strategy that he is employing, and I think that he did it pretty well. The average person doesn't care about.
I actually disagree. I don't think that was the purpose. I think I've seen this before in the sort of confessional Lutheran sphere, where there is a feeling to need to be hip with Roman Catholic intellectuals.
I don't think he's in that group.
Okay.
I think that if I would have it would have been more obvious if that's what we were working with here.
Okay, he didn't cite Cardinal Newman, so probably not.
I know what you're referring to.
Yeah, that was funny.
So this. You get two sort of dominant groups in the LCMS, both of which support the last catechism, funnily enough. One tends to be much more high church looking, much more traditionalist, that flirts with Roman Catholicism a lot and Eastern Orthodoxy. That's the one you were describing. This guy was not that, or at least that didn't come off here. This guy, I think that he does not want to be associated with this, with the sort of Roman Catholic hipsterism that you see. This is I think that he knows what was happening there, especially because pastors are going to listen to this and they're going to go back to their congregations and preach this. They're going to preach two things. They're going to preach that this thing is Roman Catholic, and then obviously the implication from there is you good Southern Protestant, which is where this guy's located. I think it's in Florida, the Panhandle, maybe. I don't remember. You good Southern Protestant. This is Roman Catholic. Do with that what you will. They're obviously going to oppose it. The other thing that's happening here is that he is tying Lutheranism in particular to liberalism. This is a, if you want to view this in a time frame, even though I'm sure he didn't have this specific goal in mind, he is post hoc rationalizing the purges that happened earlier this year. Because now, if you can tie your faith to liberalism or neoconservatism, basically the same thing for what this guy was articulating, you can justify the excommunication of Corey Mahler. You can justify the expulsion of Woe from his church. You can justify my struggle session because we weren't sufficiently liberal enough and therefore weren't actually Christian.
Yeah, it's just there's no historical context for this, though. This is a completely novel perspective. I don't see that. I mean, I didn't see him, except for that one sort of paraphrase. I don't see him quoting Luther's actual views, because if you were to bring up Luther's views on freedom of religion, they really wouldn't sound particularly liberal.
If you read Luther on the peasants' revolts, he's explicitly citing the gospel being perverted by the peasants, and then using that as a justification for the state to put them down.
Yeah,
like he is saying,
and not in like a nice way.
Yeah, he is saying peasants are perverting the gospel. They're turning it into a creed of releasing rabid animals to do as they will on society. Therefore, they must be killed to preserve the purity of the gospel. It is basically what Luther writes about the peasants. I don't think that, for some reason, I don't think Luther believes in a separation of church and state based off of that, but maybe I'm just not sufficiently academic enough to understand the true esoteric implications of what Luther wrote about the peasants. So, do you have any last things you want to add, John? Because I think we pretty well dismembered what we just watched.
No, it's just like, if this would be a okay high school research paper.
Okay.
If this was like a high school philosophy class, that would be cool.
Okay. Yeah, I think
not acceptable for like serious academia.
Okay. I think that's a good note to end our discussion on. So we did thankfully get a few super chats. Prince of Parma, for a very generous $10, said, not going to be able to catch this live, but glad to see you back, and even on my birthday at that. Well, happy birthday, Prince of Parma. Hopefully the stream doesn't cause you to lose too much patience. Hopefully you can sit through it and it's worth it. But thank you again. So for anyone that does not know, these very generous donations coming from you, the audience, are the reason that I can justify doing this and not be doing something else beyond just the personal motivation that I have, and the fact that this was egregious. The thing that we just watched was at a flagship seminary for a denomination that is increasingly trying to pride itself on its academic integrity and sophistication. I don't know that it has lived up to that standard, just by the historical inaccuracies alone, let alone the normative stuff that John and I were articulating here. I would institute changes after that if it were my institution that presented that. So thank you, Prince of Parma, very much. And Sam153 for $10 says, for the will to sit through this guy. Thank you very much. It was the first time I watched this. It was definitely a struggle to get through it. I'm sure, like John, I had to pause through and just like take a few moments to parse what was being said and to just get through it. But it going through these things needs to be done is a major point. Otherwise, it just it gets taught to clergymen, and these clergymen go back and they may have some minor disagreements or agreements, but they will end up preaching it. That's something that's just a necessary law about power. If a consensus emerges and you subject yourself to it and you aren't fundamentally opposed to it, you will go in the direction of that consensus. So some sort of pushback needs to be provided to this. And this is not, once again, just a Lutheran phenomenon. as I'm sure John can attest to, these kinds of people do not just exist within this tiny Lutheran denomination. They exist in, I think, all branches of Western Christianity. Am I wrong about that, John?
Oh, they exist in Eastern Christianity too. I mean, this is a this is a international ecumenical phenomena, you might say.
Yeah, it is certainly. This was no inside baseball, and if you get that takeaway from watching this, I would. I hope that we were articulate enough that you could go back and see how we were applying this to more than just the LCMS, as if it's some foundational institution of American public life. So, hopefully this was worth it. Hopefully it wasn't just for will and money that this was accomplished. Spasticus Autisticus for £10 says, "Glad you're back, Mr. Turnip Sneed. Have some money." Thank you very much, Spasticus. It means a great deal that you and other people in the audience will support what's happening here, and I will never not be amused by Turnip Sneed. That's probably one of the funnier things to come out of the new lingo. And then we have and the Thing Witch for $10 Canadian. Thank you very much for the very kind donation. We have Odra Noel Zenitrum. I'm going to butcher that for $5. Felt as bad as sitting through Jordan Peterson's awful manifesto abomination thing.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
And you know, they probably come from the exact same moral foundation. That might be why it feels just as bad. So that's I think that might be connected somehow, but that might be a topic for another time. So thank you to our very generous audience once again. I dearly appreciate it. For the support that I've received, not just monetarily either. I've enjoyed a great deal of emotional and spiritual support from a great deal of people across many different ethnicities, denominations, and parts of the world. That it means a great deal for me, and certainly anything that I'm doing would be, if not impossible, exceedingly difficult without that. So thank you all for even just showing back up again. I was kind of worried how this would turn out, just throwing Turnip's Digest back on at the end of the year with a day's notice. So it seems that we had good turnout, and hopefully everyone got something out of what we discussed. Do you have anything to say, John, about any of that?
Well, no, it was great to be back on the show, and to well, I'm not going to say watching this video was a good experience, but you know, it's an interesting experience. I'll say that.
Well, it was certainly very good to have you back. And for people that aren't aware of John's work, his links are in the description, but I think his best work is for the Old Glory Club, which you can find on Substack, Old Glory Club. You search for it yourself. John is a writer over there, and he has some out of the ballpark articles that he'll write seemingly every time that he puts pen to paper. So go and check him out over there. They're a nice blend of comedy and striking truth. So, yeah, I'll just chill you there. But John, is there anything that you want anyone to check out now that we're sort of signing off?
Yeah, just go subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's in the description below, and there's also a link tree, but I think that just goes to the YouTube channel and like Gab. But who cares about Gab? Oh, and the Odyssey account, which I never upload to. So there's that.
Well, you say who cares about Gab, and I feel sort of obliged to defend them here because it was the people over at Gab that helped me publish.
Yeah, I know. Andrew Torv is cool. It's just that nobody uses it.
Yeah, well, yeah. Maybe we'll see some of that change as time goes on. Perhaps we can help people that help us. You know, maybe we can get to that position in some part of the future. So everyone, go check out John. He's doing great work wherever he is doing things. And then everyone. Hopefully I'll see you back next Saturday. We'll continue Turnip's Digest. It is on again. We are, in fact, so back. So have a good rest of the day, everyone, and I will talk to you all later.